From a baby wailing in a red-soaked bathroom to a teenager staring out a frosted bus window, Harrison's life begins as a montage he can't yet decode. We open on Rita's bathroom floor. White tile, arterial spray, a tiny child sitting in a pool of blood that is not his. Crying, imprinting, cut hard to Iron Lake years later. That same child now pressed against a fogged bus window. Snow streaking past like static. The name Jim Lindsay waiting at the end of the line. Dexter smiles too wide on the platform. The hug lingers a beat too long. His voice is warm, his story neat, his plan for this new identity perfectly rehearsed. But in the edit, we don't stay on Dexter. We cut to Harrison's eyes, just slightly narrowed, as if some part of him remembers what it means when the floor is that slippery, and no one will explain why. Let's kick things off by letting the images argue before we do. Dexter's greatest failures fire past us, intercut with Harrison's quiet, accumulating suspicion. Dokes pounding on the inside of that cage, veins bulging, shouting that Dexter is the Bay Harbor Butcher. Smash cut to Harrison in Iron Lake, listening to his father casually dismiss Miami as complicated, a non-answer hanging in the air like a trace of blood. Deb stepping into a kill room she was never supposed to see. Smash cut to Harrison watching Dexter flinch when anyone mentions Trinity. Trinity at the bathtub, razor in hand, Rita's blood turning the water pink. Baby Harrison screaming in the doorway. Then Harrison again, older now, staring at a wrestling mat as his opponent rushes in. Time slows. His body moves with a precision that feels less like panic and more like calculation. One strike, one carefully targeted, nearly lethal impact. The crowd gasps, but Harrison's face is almost blank, as if he's just proven a hypothesis about his own psychology. In this video, we're going to treat that blankness as data. The focus is not just on what Dexter does in front of his son, but on the pattern Harrison has been unconsciously tracking for years. Every time Dexter claims control, something small slips. An expression, a lie, a stain that doesn't quite wash out. How many of those can you collect before they stop being coincidences and start becoming a case file? So, we cut faster. The blood slide box in Miami, glinting under fluorescent light. Harrison in Iron Lake, fingers brushing against the hidden trophies in his father's cabin. Deb's horror in that first discovered kill room. Harrison's silence as he watches Dexter handle a knife with the easy muscle memory of someone who's done this far too often. And then, finally, the kill room with Kurt. Plastic everywhere. Tape, tools, the full ritual. But when we land on Harrison's face, he isn't horrified by the decor. He's staring at how practiced his father is, how smoothly the code slides into place, how this feels less like revelation and more like confirmation. The central question is not when did he find the body, but when did all the earlier seasons of his life quietly line up into a single, undeniable pattern. Along the way, that's the realization that will shatter him. From the outside, Dexter sells himself as the ultimate safeguard, a meticulous planner, a rule-bound protector guided by the code. But when we track his life through Harrison's eyes, that mythology doesn't hold. What Harrison actually inherits is not a legacy of control, but a trail of failed plans, dead innocence, and a father who keeps standing at the center of every investigation, every tragedy, every unexplained disappearance. Let's kick things off with that blood-soaked origin. Harrison remembers being found in a pool of Rita's blood, a mirror image of Dexter's own childhood trauma. For Dexter, this is the justification for doubling down on the code, for believing his work keeps that horror from happening again. For Harrison, it's the first data point. My mother died violently, my father vanished, and no one can give me a clean, consistent story of why. The plan to protect his family by hiding his nature has already collapsed. Harrison just doesn't have the language for it yet. By the time we reach Iron Lake, the mask has a new name, Jim Lindsay. New town, new identity, same psychology. In this video, we're going to treat every normal interaction between Jim and Harrison as evidence. Harrison sees through the clumsy lies about Dexter's past, his conveniently vague stories about Miami, his oddly specific medical skills that don't match a humble store clerk. Every cover story is not a clever improvisation, it's a countdown to exposure. Every lie is another crack in the mask. Then there's the wrestling match. On paper, it's a bullying incident that Harrison ends in self-defense, but watch it from his perspective. His body moves with disturbingly precise targeting, a nearly lethal strike delivered with the same cold efficiency we've seen on Dexter's tables. Dexter reads it as proof the dark passenger is genetic. Harrison reads something else. When violence happens around me, my dad is thrilled, engaged, suddenly very present. The central question starts to shift from, what's wrong with me? Why does he light up when I'm dangerous? To keep this clear, the focus is not just on what Dexter does, but on what Harrison sees, remembers, and connects. Finding the hidden straight razor. Catching the way Dexter stalks Kurt Caldwell, how his father's concern instantly turns into surveillance, pattern analysis, and an off-the-books investigation. When Harrison finally discovers the blood slide box and kill tools, it isn't a shocking twist. It's physical confirmation of a pattern he's already mapped emotionally. Each major section will follow that same logic: operational mistakes, emotional blind spots, and Dexter's existential self-deception teaching Harrison the truth. The man who claims to protect him is the common denominator in every nightmare. Along the way, as Jim Lindsay disintegrates and the code is dragged into the open, we'll keep asking, at what point does a guardian become a suspect? And when does a suspect become a killer you can't unsee? So, from here on out, we're not treating Harrison's story like a highlight reel of kills. We're treating it like an investigation. The central question isn't when does Dexter spill the truth, but how does Harrison quietly assemble it from 1,000 tiny cracks in his father's control? To keep this clear, the focus is not just on body counts or favorite murder set pieces, it's on plans. Cover identities, alibis, emotional strategies. Every time Dexter introduces himself as Jim Lindsay, shrugs off Miami as complicated, or weaponizes vulnerability to keep Harrison close, we're going to treat that as a deliberate move on the board. In this video, we're going to follow those moves the way a detective follows a pattern in a case file. Each major section will zoom in on one of these plans as a case study in miscalculation. Dexter thinks the fake name, the quiet job, and the isolated town create a perfect firewall between Iron Lake and the Bay Harbor butcher. He believes his rehearsed half-truths about Rita's accident, his practiced empathy, and his rule-bound code are enough to convince Harrison that any darkness they share can be safely contained. On paper, it all tracks. In practice, each safeguard hides a tiny oversight that turns into a neon sign. Harrison doesn't catch his father with a body. He catches him with a pattern, the way Jim handles a razor blade with professional ease. The surgical precision of Harrison's own self-defense move on the wrestling mat, echoing techniques he's never been formally taught. The overreaction when Harrison gets too close to certain topics. These are the glitches we'll slow down and dissect. What did Dexter intend? What did he think Harrison would feel? And what actually lands in Harrison's psychology when those scenes play out? Because Harrison isn't a blank slate arriving in Iron Lake. He carries fragmented images from Miami being found in a pool of Rita's blood. Adults whispering about Trinity, a father who vanished and then reappeared with a new story. Those early traumas, prime him to notice when reality and narrative don't line up. When Kurt Caldwell starts hunting kids, and Dexter suddenly has very specific ideas about how to deal with monsters, Harrison is already tracking the overlap with a life he's been told to forget. Along the way, we'll keep naming 3 recurring dynamics: Dexter's overconfidence in his own narrative, the way he assumes he can script everyone's emotions, his hunger for connection with Harrison that makes him sloppy, rushing confessions and half-truths to secure loyalty, and his chronic underestimation of other people's intelligence, especially his son's, which turns every lie into an unintentional test Harrison is smart enough to pass. The pattern interrupt here is simple. This isn't just Dexter teaching Harrison the code. It's Harrison reverse engineering the code. By the time he finds the blood slide box, sees the kill tools, and watches Kurt's plastic-wrapped execution, he's not shocked by the existence of a killer. He's confirming the killer's identity. In the next section, we'll walk through those key scenes beat by beat, tracing the exact trajectory from suspicion to certainty as Harrison's guardian finally becomes his prime suspect. So if Harrison ends one section of his life by confirming the killer's identity, the next question is obvious. How does he actually get there? Not in one dramatic reveal, but through a slow, methodical investigation of his father's entire existence. To keep this clear, we're going to track that process chronologically. We move from the hazy, blood-soaked fragments of Miami and Rita's murder, through the uneasy reunion in Iron Lake, all the way to the kill room and the rifle shot in New Blood. Along the way, 3 kinds of failure keep repeating, 3 categories that quietly guide Harrison from confusion to certainty: operational failures, relational failures, and existential failures. Operational failures are the cracks in Dexter's supposed control, the botched logistics, the evidence that should never exist. From a wooden box of blood slides hidden under floorboards to kill tools wrapped and stashed like a starter kit for homicide, Harrison doesn't just suspect violence. He literally holds its receipts in his hands. Jim Lindsay's cover is part of this too. The fake backstory, the awkward lies about why he knows so much about blood. The way he moves in a fight like someone who has practiced hurting people for decades. Each detail is small. Together, they form a pattern. Relational failures work on a different level. These are the lies Dexter tells to keep the plan going. Half-truths about Rita's death, vague references to a bad man instead of Trinity, evasions about why they ever left Miami at all. Dexter insists he's protecting Harrison, but the story keeps changing. Every time Harrison presses for the full picture, Dexter retreats behind that rehearsed, hollow warmth. Protector on the surface, predator in the shadows. How long can a son ignore the way his father's eyes go flat when violence is mentioned? How long before I'm doing this for you starts to sound like a threat instead of comfort. Then there are the existential failures, the moments where Dexter's entire self-concept collapses. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this, because it's the central question for Harrison. Is this darkness a temporary phase, or is it who his father really is? Dexter's attempts to quit killing in Iron Lake, to reinvent himself as a harmless store clerk and a normal dad, are supposed to prove the code worked. Instead, every relapse, every one last kill, teaches Harrison the opposite lesson. The dark passenger isn't in remission. It's driving. Each major section will dig into how these 3 categories overlap in specific scenes. From the wrestling mat to Kurt's cabin. For now, we've built the roadmap. Next, we'll watch those failures play out in real time as Harrison's childhood trauma, Jim Lindsay's flimsy mask, and the New Blood investigation finally collide. So when those failures finally collide in Iron Lake, they're crashing into something much older than a small-town snow globe. They're slamming into a baby on a bathroom floor. We have to start there. With Harrison sitting in Rita's blood, framed almost shot for shot like Dexter in that shipping container. Cold tile under his legs. Red everywhere. The same visual origin Dexter has mythologized for himself is literally burned into his son's nervous system. It's not just a narrative echo for us as viewers. It's the show hardwiring Harrison into Dexter's trajectory before he can even walk. To keep this clear, Harrison doesn't grow up telling that story the way Dexter does. He doesn't have a Harry, a code, a language for it, but his body remembers. The metallic smell that doesn't match kitchen cuts or playground scrapes. The way sound distorts when adults start screaming. The shock of being lifted out of sticky, cooling blood by the very man who put the monster down. His conscious mind can't file it, but his nervous system never stops running the investigation. That's why, years later in Iron Lake, when Harrison tells Dexter he remembers more than you think, it lands like a threat and a confession at the same time. He's been handed an official plan for his own past. Trinity, a random killer, a tragic accident, but the internal images don't quite fit. Why does he remember the way Dexter's arms felt more than Rita's voice? Why does rescue and horror occupy the same frame? The story he's been given has seams, and his earliest memory keeps picking at them. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between the official story and the embodied memory, because that's the crack Harrison lives in. That origin trauma primes him to be hyper-attuned to violence, blood, and emotional dissonance. When other kids see a nosebleed, he sees a crime scene. When other kids flinch at a fight, he tracks angles, arteries, and outcomes. So when Dexter smiles warmly and insists everything's under control, Harrison can feel the static underneath. Watch how that plays out on the wrestling mat. On the surface, it's self-defense. In practice, it's a disturbingly precise, nearly lethal strike that looks less like panic and more like a kill room rehearsal. That's not a new impulse appearing in Iron Lake. That's the bathroom floor finally standing up and swinging back. The focus is not just on Harrison being violent, but on how calibrated that violence is, how familiar it feels to him. And this is where the central question of their relationship starts to twist. Harrison's journey isn't about discovering that violence exists, that ship sailed in a bathtub in Miami. It's about realizing that the man who lifted him out of that blood has been bringing violence into every room he's entered ever since. Protector and predator collapse into the same silhouette. So when Harrison eventually walks into Dexter's kill room, when he sees plastic, tools, and the code laid bare, it's not a brand new revelation. It's recognition. The baby in the blood has finally found the source. The only question left is what he does with that recognition, and who has to die for him to answer it. Recognition in the kill room is the endpoint. The vanishing act is where the investigation really starts. When Dexter drives his boat into the storm, we're told it's a sacrifice. A final, tragic plan to protect Harrison by erasing himself. On paper, it's noble. In practice, it's the same pattern we've seen every season. Faced with the collapse of his carefully managed life, Dexter reaches for control by disappearing, not by telling the truth. Protector and predator don't just merge, father and fugitive do too. To keep this clear, we have to sit with what that choice actually means for Harrison. From his perspective, there is no Bay Harbor butcher, no code, no dark passenger. There's just a dead father he barely knew, a blood-soaked origin story he can't quite remember, and a series of adults repeating a script about moving on. He shuffled through foster homes, handed file folders instead of answers, and every time he tries to talk about Miami, about Rita, about that bathroom, the room goes quiet. Concrete images pile up, a child waking from nightmares of red-on-white tile, a school assignment about family that turns into a police report recap, a social worker explaining Trinity like it's a closed case. These are not ordinary growing pains. These are the early stages of an investigation conducted by someone who doesn't yet have the language for what he's doing. And here's the pattern interrupt. Harrison is told Dexter died in a boating accident. Then he learns Rita was murdered by a serial killer. Then he learns that same killer, Trinity, was supposedly contained, identified, explained. How many convenient narrative bows can you put on one family's trauma before a smart kid starts asking, why does this story feel wrong? The focus is not just on what Harrison is told, but on what he notices is missing. No body, no personal effects, no coherent explanation of why his father left him with a woman who was already in the crosshairs of a monster. The more he reads, the more absence becomes evidence. Dexter's death doesn't resolve the puzzle, it becomes the biggest unsolved piece. The central question for Harrison quietly shifts from why did this happen to us, to who was my father really, and what was he hiding? By the time Harrison tracks down Hannah, follows the paper trail, and finally boards that bus to Iron Lake, he's not chasing a Hallmark reunion. He's following a lead. In this video, we're going to treat that bus ticket as what it actually is in his psychology, the moment a child victim turns into an active investigator. So when he steps off into the snow and meets Jim Lindsay, he's already testing. Every odd reaction, every evasive answer, every gap in Dexter's timeline gets measured against years of unanswered questions. Harrison doesn't arrive as a naive son walking into a fresh start. He walks in like someone already sure the official narrative is a lie and ready to see what breaks when he pushes on it. He walks in ready to test the story, and Dexter fails the test in the first 5 seconds. Snow, flannel, beard, new name. Jim Lindsay is supposed to be a total reinvention. But the way Harrison looks at him on that porch, that's recognition, not discovery. The eyes go first, scanning Dexter's face, mapping it against a blood-soaked memory of Miami, of being lifted from Rita's body in that bathroom. Dexter thinks time and camouflage have done the work. They haven't. His first operational plan in Iron Lake collapses on contact with his own son's memory. To keep this clear, Dexter believes he's running a simple script. Ex-junkie son shows up, grateful reunion, vague half-truths about the past, then back to small-town routine. But Harrison immediately starts logging inconsistencies. The name Jim doesn't fit the posture. The mild-mannered clerk story doesn't fit the reflexes. Even before words, Harrison clocks the way Dexter tracks him. The micro-flinch when he steps closer, the way his dad's body stays coiled like something that expects an attack. Then, Dexter opens his mouth, and the failures multiply. He claims he's never really been in combat, never had to fight. We, and Harrison, have already seen him drop a charging deer with one shot, move through the woods like a hunter, and later, tackle a guy with practiced efficiency. Harrison's face shifts in those moments from relief to a faint, tightening skepticism. If this man is just a shop clerk, why does he move like a cop, or a soldier, or something worse? The central question for Harrison becomes, is my dad damaged, or is he dangerous? And every clumsy lie pushes the answer toward that second option. Dexter sanitizes Miami into a generic breakup story, an amicable separation from Rita, a tragic but vague loss. He dodges Trinity's name, he shrinks a massacre into an anecdote. Along the way, Harrison keeps asking very specific questions about the apartment, about the bathtub, about why Dexter never came back, and gets fuzz, deflection, or straight up contradiction. This is where Harrison's intelligence really starts to register. He notices the hyper-awareness, Dexter always takes the seat with the best sightline, always notes exits, always feels the temperature of the room before speaking. He sees the too fast reflexes, the way Dexter catches a falling object without looking, the instant step between Harrison and any perceived threat. These are predator behaviors wrapped in a customer service smile. They do not belong to a man who claims he ran away because he was too broken to be a father. Every awkward dodge about Rita, every evasive half-answer about Trinity, every non-explanation for a decade of absence does two things at once. It hurts Harrison, reopening that childhood wound, and it feeds his investigation. Each lie is a data point. Each hole in the timeline is a red flag. He may not have the word serial killer yet, but liar lands early and hard, and once that label sticks, control of the narrative quietly shifts. In this video, we're going to track how that shift becomes lethal, because once Harrison stops taking Dexter's story at face value and starts treating him like a case to solve, the next step is inevitable. He doesn't just wait for the truth. He starts provoking it. So when Harrison starts provoking it, he doesn't begin with a confession or a confrontation. He starts with a test. And the wrestling mat in Iron Lake becomes his first real crime scene. Let's kick things off with that match itself. Bright gym lights, squeaking shoes, the low roar of a small-town crowd. Harrison squares up with a teammate, a kid who's been needling him, questioning his past, poking at those half-explained gaps in Miami and Rita, and why his dad is suddenly Jim Lindsay. The taunts escalate. The coach, hungry for a win, tells Harrison to dig deep, to get aggressive, to stop holding back. Then it happens. Harrison doesn't just lash out, he selects a target. He goes for the boy's most vulnerable point with chilling precision. The angle of his body, the timing of the move, the way he drives through instead of pulling back at the last second. This isn't a flailing teenager losing control. It's efficient. It's anatomical. It lands closer to an attempted maiming than a heated schoolyard fight, and the whole gym feels that line being crossed. To keep this clear, the central question isn't, why is Harrison angry? Any traumatized kid could snap. The question is, why his violence looks practiced. The strike is calculated, the follow-through is clean, and the aftermath is eerily familiar to us because we've watched Dexter do the same thing, just with knives and plastic instead of headgear and a singlet. Harrison doesn't just hurt the other boy, he demonstrates that he understands how to break a body. And that's where Dexter's plan to play harmless shop clerk collapses in real time. Outwardly, he does what any concerned father is supposed to do. He rushes to the mat, puts on the mask of horror, talks about control and consequences, tries to frame this as a mistake that can be fixed with discipline and therapy. But inwardly, something else is happening. He recognizes the dark passenger, the way a veteran recognizes a familiar wound. We see that split in a single flicker of his eyes. For a heartbeat, before the performance kicks in, there is pride, recognition, almost relief that his son might share the same gift that once made Harry design an entire code around Dexter. And Harrison, who's already shifted into investigation mode, catches it. How could he not? In this video, we're going to keep tracking that gaze, because this is the moment the mirror locks into place. For Dexter, Harrison suddenly looks like a potential proc, a chance to finally succeed where Harry failed. For Harrison, Dexter's lack of genuine shock is the real red flag. How does your dad understand near-lethal targeting well enough to analyze it on sight? Why does he seem less surprised by the brutality than by the fact it happened in public? The focus is not just on Harrison's act, but on the way it exposes a family pattern. The seed is planted. Maybe this isn't new. Maybe this is inheritance. And once Harrison starts following that thought, to its logical conclusion, the next thing he uncovers won't be on a wrestling mat. It'll be hidden in Dexter's own house. So when we cut from the wrestling mat to the therapy circle, Harrison isn't just changing locations, he's changing roles. On the mat, he's the predator who lost control. In those folding chairs, under fluorescent lights, he tries on a different costume, the traumatized kid with a dead mom and a missing dad, repeating the official story to see if it actually explains the way his brain works. He tells the group about Rita's murder, about being found in a pool of blood he barely remembers. He paints Dexter as the ghost who vanished, then reappeared in Iron Lake as Jim Lindsay, humble shop guy. On paper, it's a coherent narrative. Bad past, good therapy, fresh start. But watch his face. The more he says it out loud, the less it fits. The central question starts to itch. If this is just trauma, why does violence feel so precise when it comes out of him? That's where the razor blades come in. The self-harm isn't random. It's surgical. Harrison doesn't just scratch, he carves, testing the boundary between pain that feels punishing and pain that feels clarifying. Blood on his own skin becomes a private investigation into why the sight of red is both repulsive and weirdly familiar. Is he reenacting the night of Rita's death, or echoing something even older in the family line? To keep this clear, the focus is not just on the act, but on the timing. The blades show up as Harrison is hearing other kids label their experiences. Anxiety, depression, PTSD, they have diagnostic language. He has images. A bathroom, a bathtub, a mother's body, a father's absence. The therapy room gives him words like trigger and dissociation, but they don't fully cover what happens when he imagines hurting someone, and his mind instantly supplies technique. Dexter sees the cuts, and for a moment, we see the possibility of a different trajectory. He's shaken. He's scared. He sits on the bed, asks questions, offers comfort. This could be the scene where he finally lays out his own origin trauma, the code, the way Harry tried to shape his darkness instead of cure it. In this video, we're going to keep pointing at moments like this, because they're the pressure valves that never get opened. Instead, Dexter does what he's always done. He minimizes. He talks about normal teenage turmoil, about how things will get better, about staying in control. He withholds the one piece of information that might actually make Harrison feel less alone, that he's not imagining the inheritance, that there is, in fact, a pattern. And Harrison notices. Each time conversation drifts toward real darkness, toward Miami, Trinity, Rita's death. The gaps in Jim Lindsay's biography, Dexter redirects. A joke here, a half-truth there, a flat-out lie when pressed. Along the way, Harrison builds his own code, not about killing, but about trust. When Dad dodges, Dad is hiding something. When Dad gets specific about everyone else's psychology, but vague about his own, there's a deeper layer he's not allowed to see. Here's the pattern interrupt. For Harrison, the failure isn't the self-harm. It's the failed confession. If his dad isn't just a normal guy, and if his own impulses feel inherited, then what exactly is he the son of? That unanswered question becomes his internal cliffhanger, the tension that will drag him from therapy circles and razor blades to the one place that might finally hold an answer, Dexter's secrets, laid out in plastic and blood. That unanswered question doesn't get resolved in a therapist's office. It walks into Iron Lake in a trucker jacket and a friendly smile. Kurt Caldwell is the answer Harrison's been looking for, even before he knows to ask the central question. What kind of man did his father really teach him to be? On the surface, Kurt is everything Jim Lindsay pretends to be. Local royalty, war hero, the guy who picks up runaways at the diner and pays for their meals. But We've seen the basement. We know about the cabin, the camera, the embalmed girls standing like trophies in glass. From a creepy country song in a truck to a terrified girl sprinting through the snow, Kurt's ritual is Iron Lake's own dark code. Find vulnerable prey, make them feel safe, then erase them where no one will look. The focus is not just on his kills, but on how perfectly he mirrors Dexter's old Miami pattern while wearing a much better mask. To keep this clear, Kurt becomes the external pressure Dexter has never really handled well. Kurt likes Harrison. He offers him a job, attention, a story about survival in war that sounds heroic and broken at the same time. At the exact same moment, he needles Jim, lies about Matt's survival, and starts his own quiet investigation into why this stranger appeared right when his son vanished. Two predators circling each other, both convinced they're in control, and Harrison is in the middle, watching. This is where Dexter's plan collapses. Jim Lindsay should shrug, defer, stay out of it. Instead, we see the old circuitry kick on. He stalks Kurt's truck. He breaks into the diner office. His questions get sharper, his eyes colder. Around Kurt, Jim disappears, and Dexter Morgan resurfaces. The forensic brain, the hunter's patience, the absolute certainty that he, not the police, has to solve this. How does a supposedly mild-mannered shop clerk know how to tail a suspect or dissect inconsistencies in an alibi so fast? Along the way, Harrison feels that dissonance. On one side, Kurt is open about his damage, even if the details are lies. On the other, Dexter keeps insisting everything's fine while radiating panic. Harrison hears two war stories, two versions of fatherhood, two different ways of talking about violence. One man is clearly dangerous. The other insists he's harmless, but his reactions around Kurt say otherwise. Which one is actually telling the truth? Each major section will show Dexter pushed further out of character. The wrestling match brutality, the escalating confrontations. The way Dexter suddenly has endless time for errands whenever Kurt is nearby. Harrison doesn't catch him with a body, he catches him with a pattern. And Kurt, ironically, won't be the one to expose Dexter to Iron Lake. His real function in this season is more precise and more devastating. By forcing Dexter to bring Harrison into the hunt, Kurt becomes the man who finally exposes Dexter to his own son. Kurt forces Dexter to bring Harrison into the hunt. But Iron Lake itself is what brings Harrison back into Miami. We start with tiny things. Blood on snow where there shouldn't be any. Sirens knifing through the quiet town at night. A girl's face on a missing poster that everyone pretends not to see. These images don't give Harrison a full flashback to Rita's murder. They do something more insidious. They pull loose threads in his memory. The bathtub. The red. The way adults spoke in hushed, broken sentences around him afterward. To keep this clear, Harrison doesn't remember a detailed crime scene. He remembers a mood. Fear humming in the walls. A sense that everyone knew something terrible had happened, but no one would say the words out loud. So, when Iron Lake starts to echo that same emotional frequency, police investigations with gaps, Angela asking questions that never get straight answers, Dexter stiffening whenever Miami is mentioned, Harrison's brain does what it's wired to do. It starts hunting for a pattern. Harrison's psychology works like a radar, not a filing cabinet. He can't list every fact from his childhood, but he can feel when the emotional weather matches. Adults whispering in corners, a father figure who's always a little too calm when danger appears. The focus is not just on what he sees, but how it feels. The wrestling match is a perfect example. On the surface, it's a bully getting payback. Underneath, it's Harrison's body, remembering something his mind can't name yet. Precision, control, the knowledge of exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. And Dexter's reactions keep confirming that this isn't random. When Harrison is hurt, Dexter's panic isn't normal parental fear, it's tactical. He scans the room, calculates threats, instantly jumps to containment. When a news report mentions the missing girls, Dexter doesn't just look concerned. He tenses, changes the subject, starts running his own off-the-books investigation into Kurt. In this video, we're going to keep circling that gap between what Dexter says he's doing, protecting his son, and what Harrison actually experiences, a man obsessed with tracking a killer, yet allergic to transparency. Gradually, Harrison realizes his life has a disturbing symmetry. Miami, a mother murdered by a serial killer, a father who always seemed to be hiding something, a police department that never gave him the full truth. Iron Lake, another hidden predator, another nervous dad, another investigation with missing pieces. Is this just bad luck, or is there a common denominator? The central question snaps into focus. If the same pattern follows Dexter wherever he goes, what if Dexter isn't the victim of these stories, but the axis they spin around? This is the moment Harrison stops treating each event as coincidence and starts seeing a design. One man at the center of Miami and Iron Lake. One man who reacts to blood, to danger, to killers with the fluency of experience. And once Harrison starts testing that theory, once he starts pushing on Dexter's lies instead of absorbing them, the entire Jim Lindsay persona is going to face its most dangerous investigation yet. And that investigation doesn't just come from what Harrison sees Dexter do. It comes from what he feels in every room they share, even when nothing is happening. Or, more accurately, when something invisible is happening that Harrison can't name. To keep this clear, we have to talk about Deborah. In New Blood, Dexter's old dark passenger voice is gone, replaced by a full-bodied hallucination of Deb. She's not a quirky conscience. She's a walking crime scene of his guilt. She mocks his plans, shreds his rationalizations, and drags every choice into a courtroom where he is always on trial. The psychology here is blunt. Dexter's fractured mind externalizes the one person whose death he can't bury under the code. From the outside, though, Harrison doesn't see Deb. He just sees the consequences. A dad who freezes mid-sentence at the mention of Miami. A man whose eyes drift to the corner of the room like he's listening to someone else. Sudden mood swings that don't track with what was just said. Calm 1 second, clipped and irritable the next, as if he's already lost an argument Harrison never heard. That's not supernatural. That's what living with someone in an internal war feels like. The central question for Harrison becomes simple. Why is my father always somewhere else? He shows up late. He vanishes without explanation. He overreacts to small risks, then underreacts to big emotional moments. When Harrison bleeds on the wrestling mat, Dexter's face flashes pure terror, then goes blank, then turns almost analytical. Protect, distance, calculate, 3 modes in a few seconds. Harrison doesn't need to see Deb's ghost to register that collapse of consistency. And Dexter's guilt over Deb doesn't soften him into a better parent. It makes him overcorrect. One day, he's the overprotective dad, shutting down Harrison's friendships, hovering at school, pushing him away from anything that smells like danger. The next, he's the cold strategist, teaching Harrison how to channel his anger, how to read predators, how to weaponize his pain. From Harrison's vantage point, that's emotional instability masquerading as care. Which version of his father is real? Which one will show up when things actually go wrong? Here's the pattern interrupt. For Harrison, Deb is still there anyway. She exists in the negative space. The sister Dexter never mentions by name. The half-finished Miami stories, that always stop right before the hospital, right before the hurricane, right before the gun in the shipping container. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that absence, because the focus is not just on what Dexter says, but on what his silence teaches. Every omission tells Harrison that something in his father's past is so powerful, it still dictates their present. That's the existential failure. Dexter's unresolved history with Deb, with Miami, with the original investigation into the Bay Harbor butcher, means he can't actually live as Jim Lindsay in Iron Lake. He's physically there, but psychologically pulled backward, replaying an old season that never ended. Along the way, Harrison learns a devastating lesson. Whatever his dad did before, it still owns him now. And if it owns Dexter, how long before it starts owning Harrison too? That tension between past and present finally snaps when Harrison goes after the one story Dexter has always treated like sacred, untouchable mythology: Rita and the Trinity Killer. The Miami tragedy Dexter has turned into a tragic backstory and nothing more. It starts small. Harrison asks basic questions any son would ask. How did Mom really die? Who was Trinity? Why didn't you stop him? On the surface, Dexter answers. He gives names, dates, the official investigation headline, but the way he does it is chilling. No texture, no emotion, just a procedural recap of the worst night of Harrison's life, delivered like he's reading a case file instead of reliving a trauma. To keep this clear, Dexter's plan in that conversation is simple: acknowledge just enough of the pain to keep Harrison close, but keep the operational truth buried. He frames Trinity as a monster who slipped through the cracks. He paints himself as a grieving husband who did his best. He carefully avoids the details that would connect his own blood-soaked trajectory to that bathtub. No mention of the code, no mention of how deeply entangled he was in the Trinity investigation. Definitely no mention that he left baby Harrison alone in a house already targeted by a serial killer. Harrison hears the gaps immediately. He presses. Where were you when it happened? How could Trinity get that close to us? Why does my only clear memory from that night match your childhood trauma almost exactly? Each question is a scalpel. Each evasive answer exposes more of the wound. Dexter keeps reaching for "it was complicated," "I did everything I could," "some things are better left in the past." But those lines ring hollow when you've already watched your father lie about his name, his job, his entire life. This is where the psychology shifts. Harrison's anger isn't just grief, it's humiliation. He realizes his father abandoned him for nearly a decade, then came back and is still editing the story like Harrison is a child who can't handle the truth. Dexter thinks he's maintaining control. In reality, the lie is the failure. By refusing to walk Harrison through what really happened that night, Dexter accidentally confirms there is something about his own role he cannot admit. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to moments like this, where relational breakdowns create operational consequences. Here, the consequence is brutal. Harrison starts running his own investigation. If Dad is lying about Trinity, what else is he hiding? How many other monsters were there? How often was Dexter standing right next to the blood instead of safely outside it? By the end of that confrontation, Harrison doesn't have proof, but he has a pattern. The central question in his head is no longer "how did my mom die?" It's "what is my dad capable of?" And once he realizes Dexter is willing to distort the worst night of his life, it's a short, terrifying step to assuming there's a lot more blood on Dexter's hands than he's confessing. That suspicion will guide everything he does next. That suspicion doesn't just point outward at Dexter, it ricochets inward. Because every time Harrison wonders, what is my dad capable of? There's a quieter, more disturbing echo right behind it. What am I capable of? We see it most clearly on that wrestling mat. A crowded gym, bright lights, the illusion of a normal high school season. Then, Harrison snaps into something else. His self-defense isn't wild or panicked. It's surgical. He targets the artery, drives in with lethal intent, and for a split second, we can feel the rush with him. Control, power, the body under his hands going limp. And then, almost immediately, horror. Who thinks like that in a split second? Who feels that good about almost killing someone? To keep this clear, Harrison's conflict isn't just guilt over violence. It's the dissonance between how wrong it is and how right it feels in his nervous system. That's classic dark passenger territory. Dexter has spent 8 seasons naming that thing, ritualizing it, wrapping it in Harry's code to make it livable. Harrison has none of that language. No code, no framework, just the raw electricity of the urge and a growing fear that his brain is wired for the same kind of damage. Dexter, of course, reads this as confirmation of his own mythology. In his psychology, darkness is an inheritance, a kind of shared DNA. He sees Harrison's precision on the mat, the way he talks about pain, the way he gravitates toward violent stories, and he doesn't ask, "What does my son need?" He asks, "Is this my replacement?" The focus is not just on protecting Harrison, but on preserving the plan Harry gave him. Channel the monster, control the monster, pass the system on. But Dexter never gives Harrison the full script. Instead, we get half confessions, hints about urges, vague talk about darkness, warnings about anger with no real explanation. Imagine hearing, from the one parent you have left, that there's something dangerous inside you, then being denied the investigation that would tell you what that actually means. Is it a trauma response, a mental illness, a curse, a destiny? Harrison is left in limbo, convinced he's broken and watching his father clearly understand more than he's willing to say. This is where the potential bridge becomes a wedge. Shared darkness could have been the one honest thing between them. Dexter could have said, "I know exactly what you're feeling, and here's why." Instead, he stays behind glass. He guides Harrison toward Kurt, toward vigilantism, toward the code, but still hides the Bay Harbor butcher truth and the full body count. Harrison senses the alignment. His dad moves like him, thinks like him, kills like him, and that makes the silence feel like a verdict. If Dexter won't be honest, even with someone who shares his worst impulses, what does that say about how monstrous those impulses must be? In this video, we're going to keep tracking that question, because Harrison's investigation is never just about his father's past. It's a mirror. Each new lie he uncovers isn't only evidence that Dexter is a killer, it's a clue about what kind of killer Harrison might be becoming. And the moment those two lines finally collide, the collapse is brutal. But before we get to that breaking point, we need to watch Dexter make the worst possible decision with the best possible justification. And the worst possible decision is always the same. Dexter believes the plan is airtight because he designed it. He trusts his own control more than he fears the consequences, which is exactly how we end up at the most damning piece of evidence Harrison will ever see. It doesn't start with a scream or a body. It starts with a feeling, a drawer that doesn't sit quite right, a floorboard that sounds off. Harrison has been living inside Jim Lindsay's performance long enough to sense that the stage set doesn't match the script. So when he finally goes looking, he isn't just snooping, he's conducting an investigation that Dexter never imagined he'd have to survive. The moment he finds the hiding place, the illusion collapses fast. A small box, ordinary, almost boring, tucked away with the kind of casual confidence only a man convinced of his own invisibility would have. Harrison opens it, and the world tilts. Neat rows of glass slides, each with a single smear of blood, catching the light like tiny, stained glass windows of violence. No labels that say victim, no dates, no explanations, just a silent, organized archive of death. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on the fact that Dexter has killed. The focus is on how he has curated those kills. Each slide is a preserved moment, a trophy, a ritualized confirmation that the code has been followed and the dark passenger fed. It's a twisted photo album, the Bay Harbor Butcher's greatest hits, condensed into a box that fits in one hand. How do you argue you're not a serial killer when your crimes are literally cataloged under your roof? And it's not just the slides. Along the way, Harrison finds the tools, the knives honed a little too perfectly, the plastic, the restraints. The kid of a man who doesn't just defend himself, but prepares, plans, rehearses. No normal father owns a mobile kill room in miniature. No normal father keeps the evidence of his victims like souvenirs. Harrison's body understands before his mind catches up. Shock, nausea, that cold electric recognition that this is what his instincts have been circling all season. The wrestling match, the precision of his own self-defense move, the way he's always felt both drawn to and terrified by violence, suddenly it's all reflected back at him, in glass and steel. The central question stops being, is my dad dangerous? And becomes, what does it mean that I am his son? Here's the operational failure. Dexter believed Iron Lake was a fresh start, that Jim Lindsay was a strong enough mask, that no one, least of all his own child, would look behind the curtain. He abandons Miami, but not the ritual. He gives up the ocean, but not the trophies. The code stays, the slides stay, the tools stay. That's not control. That's complacency dressed up as discipline. In this video, we're going to keep tracking how that complacency turns lethal, but this is the tipping point. After the box, Harrison doesn't need confessions or theories. He has physical proof that his father isn't a man who made one terrible mistake. He's a serial killer who has done this many, many times. The next time he watches Dexter set up a kill room, he won't be guessing what's really happening. He'll already know. And once a son knows that about his father, what plan is left that doesn't end in blood? So when Dexter brings Harrison into Kurt Caldwell's kill room, we're not walking into a mystery. We're walking into confirmation. Harrison has already seen the box, already traced the pattern. Now he gets to watch that pattern unfold in real time. Plastic sheeting clings to the walls and floor, turning the space into a synthetic cave. Restraints are bolted down with ugly practicality. Knives, saws, and slides are laid out with a precision that looks less like improvisation and more like habit. Dexter doesn't fumble or hesitate. He moves through the room with the relaxed efficiency of someone who has rehearsed this sequence for years. Stalk the target. Secure the victim. Prepare the tools. Leave no evidence. From Harrison's perspective, the shock isn't just that his dad has a kill room. It's that the choreography is so smooth. He watches the plastic wrap go around Kurt's body with practiced motions, hears the familiar cadence of Dexter's speech as he explains why Kurt deserves this, and realizes this isn't a desperate one-off reaction to danger. This is a system. This is a plan that has been executed, refined, and repeated. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on the gore. It's on the psychology of the ritual. Dexter lays out Harry's code like a family heirloom, explaining how they only kill people who deserve it, how the investigation into Kurt's crimes proves he's a predator, how this is justice, not murder. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between what Dexter calls justice and what it actually looks like when you're standing in the plastic with him. For a moment, Harrison rides the adrenaline. He's in on the secret. The man who hurt him, who hunted other kids, is strapped to a table, and his father is the avenging force. What teenager, especially one carrying childhood trauma, wouldn't feel a rush at that reversal of power? But then he looks around and sees how at home Dexter is. The careful tools, the calm voice, the total control. And that's where the high starts to curdle. Because if this is all about justice, why does Dexter look so comfortable? Why does he have a rehearsed speech, a transport method, a disposal plan? How many times has he done this exact thing while pretending to be Jim Lindsay? Or before that, the harmless blood guy in Miami? Along the way, the central question for Harrison shifts. It's no longer, did my dad do something terrible once? It becomes, who is my father when I'm not looking? In that room, he stops entertaining the fantasy of a basically good man with dark secrets and starts seeing a serial killer whose entire identity, every season of his life, has been engineered around this ritual. And once you've watched your father perform his code like a well-practiced script, how do you ever believe his promises about change, control, or a normal future again? So when the plastic comes down and Kurt is gone, Dexter doesn't give Harrison space to process what he's seen. He fills that space. He moves straight into a debrief, like this was a training exercise that went according to plan. He walks Harrison through it as if he's narrating a family tradition. Kurt was a predator. The police would have failed. The code stepped in where the system collapsed. We only kill bad people. This is how we save others. This is what Harry wanted for us. To keep this clear, Dexter reframes every disturbing detail Harrison just witnessed as evidence of a higher purpose, not a pathology he's been hiding for years. And for a moment, it almost works. Harrison feels the relief first. Kurt can't hurt him. The abductions stop. The nightmare of being hunted in Iron Lake finally ends. On a surface level, Dexter's story lines up with Harrison's immediate psychology. Something terrible was stalking him, and his father eliminated the threat. But the method won't leave his head. The plastic-wrapped body. The careful tools laid out in order. The way Dexter's voice barely changed as he explained the code with a corpse on the table. Gratitude and revulsion collide in the same frame. How do you thank someone for saving your life when they did it in a way that makes your skin crawl? This is where the cognitive dissonance spikes. Harrison wants the hero version. He wants the dad who stopped Trinity, who couldn't save Rita but tried, who has been running from his past and finally chose to stand and fight. That's the central question in his mind. Is this the man who rescued me from monsters or the man who creates them? Because the specifics don't feel like reluctant necessity. The blood slides, the ritual bath and control, the way Dexter's whole body relaxes once the kill room is active. These details point to enjoyment, not just obligation. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between what Dexter calls a code and what it actually looks like in practice. But here, Harrison is the first real-time investigation of that gap. So, he starts testing. Each major section will, in Harrison's head, become a mini trial of Dexter's rules. Was Kurt really the only option? What about the wrestling coach, the dealer, the people Dexter gets angry at but doesn't kill? Who makes the cut for the table, and who gets a second chance, and why? The focus is not just on what Dexter says anymore, but on the pattern of who he targets, how he talks afterward, how quickly he pivots from guilt to justification. Along the way, Harrison stops being a passive audience for his father's myth and turns into something else entirely, an investigator, quietly building a case about whether this code is justice or just a story a killer tells himself. And once Harrison starts gathering evidence, the next failure isn't about a body on a table. It's about a son deciding what to do with the truth he's collecting. And once Harrison starts gathering evidence, the next question becomes brutal in its simplicity. If your gut says your dad is dangerous, who can possibly prove you right? Iron Lake gives him an answer Harry never had. A police chief. In your house. Sleeping with the suspect. Because Angela isn't just Dexter's girlfriend. She's the town's chief of police, which means every date night is sitting on top of an open case file. While Dexter is busy selling the fantasy of Jim Lindsay, mild-mannered shop clerk, Angela is quietly running an investigation on the man in her bed. Travel records. Old news articles. Missing persons in Miami. The Bay Harbor Butcher. From the moment she comes back from that conference and sees Dexter's Jim face on an old photo with Angel Batista, the trajectory shifts. The plan to disappear in plain sight is officially under review. To keep this clear, watch how the pressure builds in 3 movements. First, the questions sound almost casual. Why did you fake your death? Why no social media? No digital footprint? No path? Then she starts bringing printouts and timelines, asking about Miami Metro just a little too specifically. Finally, she says the quiet part out loud. What if the Bay Harbor Butcher wasn't James Stokes? What if it was you? Harrison doesn't hear every word. But he doesn't have to. He hears raised voices through thin walls. He sees Angela leave in silence, jaw clenched, while Dexter stands stranded in the doorway, already drafting his next lie. Each confrontation is like a siren going off in the background of his life. Law enforcement is circling the same man Harrison is starting to question. This is no longer just teenage resentment. It's an official investigation converging on his father. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between Dexter's sense of control and the reality closing in. With Angela, the gap is glaring. When she confronts him about the needle marks on Jasper Hodge, about Matt Caldwell's conveniently vanished body, about why someone with his code of caution keeps ending up near missing men, Dexter's responses are textbook deflection. He blames trauma, claims confusion, talks about protecting Harrison. He does everything except tell the truth. And Harrison is watching. He watches Dexter minimize, redirect, and weaponize vulnerability as a shield. He watches him choose the cover-up over honest connection, again and again. If his dad lies this hard to a police chief, what chance does a son have of ever getting the real story? Here's the pattern interrupt. The external voice finally says what Harrison is afraid to think. Angela names him. She links Jim Lindsay to Dexter Morgan, Dexter Morgan to Miami, Miami to the Bay Harbor Butcher. The focus is not just on one bad night or one dead deer on the highway. It's on a decade-long pattern of bodies and blood. At that point, the central question for Harrison changes. It's no longer, is Dad hiding something? It becomes, is Dad the monster everyone missed? And once law enforcement puts that label on the table, the next section has to deal with the fallout. What happens when Dexter's last, most personal cover story can't survive contact with his own child? Once the label Bay Harbor Butcher is in the air. The investigation stops being abstract history and starts feeling like a mirror. Harrison doesn't meet that name in a textbook way. He stumbles into it through Angela's obsession, through tabs left open on her laptop, through those late-night arguments about Miami that go quiet the second he walks into the room. It's not one dramatic reveal. It's a slow bleed of information. He sees the old articles, grainy photos of Miami marinas, FBI briefings, maps with red pins. The dates hit him first. These murders were happening when he was a kid, in the same city where he lived with his boring, blood-averse dad. To keep this clear, the timeline doesn't just overlap Dexter's life, it practically traces it. Every year Harrison remembers a birthday party or a beach day, there's a corresponding spike in bodies pulled from the ocean. That's where the chill sets in. This isn't just some monster who terrorized Miami. This is a monster who operated in Dexter's exact shadow. At the exact time, Dexter was supposedly clocking in at Miami Metro and coming home to Rita and the kids. How many serial killers, with surgical precision and a perfect read on forensic procedure, can one city sustain? How many can live that close to Harrison without him noticing? As he reads more, the profile tightens around Dexter, like plastic. The butcher is methodical. He leaves almost no trace. He clearly understands blood, trace evidence, chain of custody. The investigation notes that he was always one step ahead of the police, anticipating raids, dodging dragnets, adjusting his plan whenever law enforcement changed tactics. We've already seen Harrison clock Dexter's instincts in Iron Lake, the way he reads a crime scene, the way he corrects police assumptions, the way he moves in a fight like he's rehearsed every angle. So, Harrison does what Dexter has done his whole life. He overlays patterns. He puts the Bay Harbor butcher's crimes on top of his own fragmented childhood memories. The night police swarmed their house, and Rita looked like she'd been crying for hours. The late cases that pulled Dexter out of bed. The way adults in Miami would stop talking when he walked into a room. Then restart in euphemisms about stress at the department and a difficult season. Are those just job pressures, or the psychological fallout of living next to an undiscovered serial killer? In this video, we're going to keep returning to that moment because it marks a shift in Harrison's internal code. Before the Bay Harbor butcher name, Dexter is a damaged man with a dark secret. After, he's a missing puzzle piece in a notorious true crime saga. The focus is not just on a father lying to his son. It's on a father who may have rewritten an entire city's history while tucking that son into bed. Each major section will build on this, but here the trajectory is clear. Harrison stops asking what Dexter is hiding and starts asking whether the world's most infamous unknown subject has been sitting across from him at breakfast the whole time. The next step is inevitable. If that's true, what does that make Harrison? So when Harrison finally lands on that terrifying possibility that the unknown subject might be his own father, the next thing he grabs onto is the only lifeline Dexter offers: the code. Not I'm sick, not I need help, a plan, a system, a promise of control. Let's kick things off with that campfire confession in miniature. Dexter explaining Harry's rules like he's passing down a family heirloom. Only kill killers. Make sure they deserve it. Never get caught. He doesn't frame it as a desperate coping mechanism cobbled together by a panicked cop and a traumatized child. He sells it to Harrison as a moral philosophy, a way to turn the darkness into justice. The focus is not just on what Dexter does, but on how he narrates it, as if a checklist can baptize blood. At first, Harrison wants to believe. It gives shape to his own violent impulses, from the disturbingly precise wrestling takedown to that razor blade drawing blood like it's a test. But the more detail Dexter shares, the more Harrison starts pushing at the seams. If the code is about protecting innocence, why did Rita die? Why did Deb die? Why was a baby left screaming in a pool of blood in Miami, and another teenager abandoned to grow up alone? To keep this clear, Harrison isn't just asking about bodies, he's asking about consequences. We watch him test the edges. Why keep killing after faking your death? Why bring the code to Iron Lake at all, if the whole point of disappearing was to stop? Why is Kurt Caldwell fair game, but all the other toxic, violent people in this town get a pass until they intersect with Dexter's investigation? The central question shifts from, is Dad a killer? To, is this code anything more than a story he tells himself so he can feel like the hero of his own pathology? And once we zoom out across the seasons, Harrison's skepticism lands with brutal accuracy. Every time Dexter claims he's following the code perfectly, the plan collapses. Brian weaponizes family. Dokes catches the blood slides. Leela, Miguel, Trinity, each alliance and adjustment to the rules leads to more collateral damage, not less. The pattern is unmistakable. The tighter Dexter grips his supposed control, the wider the blast radius becomes. In this video, we're going to keep tracking that trajectory, but here the psychology turns existential. If Harrison sees the code as arbitrary, self-serving, even hypocritical, then Dexter's entire identity is on trial. Without the code, he isn't a careful vigilante. He's just a murderer with a script. And Harrison is the first person who both knows the full script and refuses to clap. So what happens when the only audience that matters starts calling out plot holes in real time? And Dexter's next ethical kill is the one Harrison is standing inside of? Dexter thinks he's fixing the code by updating the software. In reality, he's just reinstalling Harry's original bug on a new hard drive. Harrison doesn't know it yet, but he's being drafted into a plan that broke the first time it ran. To keep this clear, we have to jump back and forth. Young Dexter in those Miami flashbacks, sitting in squad cars, walking crime scenes, being walked through Harry's rules in whispers and half-truths. Only bad people. Never get caught. This is how you stay in control. The focus is not just on what Harry says, but what he refuses to say. He never really names what Dexter is. Never really confronts the psychology or the moral collapse at the center of this project. Dexter is trained like a weapon, not raised like a son. Cut to Iron Lake. Different state, different name, same script. Instead of a cop father sneaking a boy into crime scenes, we have Jim Lindsay, the quiet shop clerk who just happens to know way too much about blood, knives, and how to read people. Harrison notices. When Dexter guides him through that wrestling move, we're watching the code reboot in real time. Stalk the target. Find the weakness. Deliver the precise, nearly lethal strike. Dexter calls it self-defense. We recognize it as a kill lesson. This is Harry's mistake, replayed with a cruel twist. Harry taught Dexter to channel his urges without ever interrogating their origin or their consequences. Dexter now teaches Harrison the rules of his world. People who hurt others deserve to be punished. We stop them. We're different from them, without fully owning what that has cost. He talks about monsters like Kurt, but not about Trinity. He talks about saving people, but not about Rita in the bathtub, Deb in the shipping container, or the trail of bodies from season 1 through season 8. So Harrison gets rules without history, justifications without confession. He finds the blood slide box, the tools, the plastic, but Dexter still won't narrate the full investigation of his own life. When Dexter finally brings Harrison into Kurt's kill room, it's framed as a dark father-son bonding moment, a graduation into the code. But even there, Dexter edits the story. He is the righteous executioner, not the Bay Harbor butcher. These are necessary kills, not a pattern spiraling out of control. That gap breeds resentment. How long can you be asked to carry someone's legacy when you were never asked whether you wanted it, never told what it really is? Harrison is being positioned as successor to a mission built on lies about Miami. Lies about why he grew up without a mother, lies about why Deb is gone. The central question for him becomes brutally simple. If this code is so ethical, why can't my father say out loud what he's done? Here's the pattern interrupt. Dexter thinks secrecy protects Harrison. In this video, we're going to argue it does the opposite. By hiding the full ledger, Dexter guarantees that when Harrison finally adds up the fragments, Rita, Trinity, the slides, Kurt's plastic-wrapped body, he won't just see a flawed vigilante. He'll see the man who stole his childhood and then tried to sell that theft as destiny. And that son, armed with the code and the truth, is poised to judge Dexter more harshly than any cop, any court, or any previous season ever has. And once Harrison's judgment lands, Dexter's last illusion of control doesn't just crack. It becomes the final crime scene. Harrison doesn't crack the case with a body on a table. He cracks it with 100 tiny glitches in Dexter's performance. Micro mistakes. Little ruptures in the Jim Lindsay mask that, on their own, look harmless. Together, they form a crime scene. Let's kick things off with the operational tells, because those are the ones Dexter thinks he has under control. In Iron Lake, every time there's an incident, Jim is just a little too competent. A school threat, a missing kid, a bloody mess in the woods, Dexter slides into crime scene mode like muscle memory. He knows how long it would take for cops to respond. He knows where blood would pool. He knows which questions to ask before the investigation has even officially begun. Harrison watches that. A normal shop clerk doesn't talk like a forensics textbook. Then there's the blood. For anyone else, blood is shock, nausea, recoil. For Dexter, it's a language. When Harrison slices his own hand, when violence erupts at school. When stories of Trinity surface, Dexter doesn't flinch. His eyes sharpen. His posture straightens. His voice gets calmer, not more panicked. The central question for Harrison becomes, why does my dad look more alive when everyone else is horrified? To keep this clear, the focus is not just on what Dexter does, but on how his body gives him away. When violence is mentioned, he leans in, not back. When Harrison describes his self-defense wrestling move, the razor-precise strike that nearly kills a bully, Dexter's reaction isn't pure fear. It's recognition. Pride slips through, then gets buried under a lecture about control and the code. Harrison may not have the language for that psychology yet, but he feels the contradiction. On the behavioral side, the disappearances start to stack. Dexter vanishes right before key confrontations. He reappears with half-plausible stories that don't quite match the timeline. One night, he's out clearing his head. The next, he's checking on the store, and Harrison notices that those gaps always line up with the most dangerous beats of the Kurt Caldwell investigation. Each lie is small. Each excuse is technically possible. But why does danger seem to orbit his father's absence? We get specific echoes of Miami in those lies. Dexter minimizes Rita's death. He downplays Trinity. He frames their past as something tragic but distant, something closed. Then Harrison hears other versions, other details, and realizes the man who hid Miami is using the same tone, the same soft omissions to hide Iron Lake. The pattern is the point. Each major section of Harrison's growing suspicion feels, at first, like overthinking. He tells himself he's being unfair, but his mind is a pattern engine, trained by trauma and sharpened by that wrestling match. So when he finally finds the blood slides, tucked away with the tools, the trophies, the physical proof, it isn't a revelation out of nowhere. It's confirmation. The model in his head snaps into place instantly. His dad didn't just lie about Miami. His dad built an entire life on the same failing plan: pretend control, deny consequences, hope no one connects the dots. And now, Harrison has connected them. Once Harrison connects the blood slides to everything that's been off about Jim Lindsay, Dexter's behavior doesn't suddenly change. Our interpretation of it does. All those moments that once played as a damaged dad finally stepping up start to reframe as something colder, more strategic, more about control than care. Let's kick things off with the early protector beats in Iron Lake. Dexter confronting the wrestling kid who bullied Harrison. Dexter warning him about Kurt, insisting this friendly rich guy is dangerous. Dexter pushing him toward therapy, away from drugs, trying to manage who he spends time with and where he goes. On the surface, this is overdue parenting after a decade of abandonment. Harrison is hungry for that. He leans into it. For a while, the plan works because the story it tells Harrison is simple. My dad finally chose me. But the central question is when that protection crosses an invisible line. The turning point is subtle at first. Dexter doesn't just confront a bully, he stalks him. He doesn't just warn about Kurt, he surveils him, manipulates the investigation, hides evidence. He doesn't just suggest boundaries, he makes decisions for Harrison and presents them as non-negotiable safety measures. Short sentence. Short sentence. Then a longer realization. What looks like concern is built on the same unilateral logic as a kill room. Dexter decides the threat. Dexter decides the response. Dexter decides the acceptable level of collateral damage. To keep this clear, we have to track the psychology on Harrison's side. Before, he suspects murder. Every "I'm doing this to protect you" lands as a bandage on an old wound. After he finds the slides, every repetition of that phrase has a double edge. Is Dexter shielding him from Kurt, or grooming him to accept a world where killing Kurt is the logical next step? Is he worried Harrison will get hurt, or worried Harrison will talk? When Dexter explains his code, frames it as a moral shield against chaos, Harrison hears a recruitment pitch disguised as a confession. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this idea that relationships become operational assets in Dexter's mind. Harrison feels that shift in real time. He stops being just a son and starts to feel like an asset being managed, a potential accomplice who understands the code, or a potential weakness who knows too much. The way Dexter walks him through Kurt's kill room, the way he narrates the ritual, is less "let me free you from this cycle," and more "let me normalize my trajectory so you'll stay." What kind of father turns a horror scene into a teaching moment? The focus is not just on the violence, but on the relational failure underneath it. If Dexter truly loved Harrison, wouldn't the plan be to keep him as far from this darkness as possible, even at the cost of exposure, arrest, or death? Instead, Dexter keeps trying to fold Harrison into the system, to make the boy fit the code rather than breaking the code for the boy. And as Harrison feels that, as he realizes he's being pulled into a collapsing world rather than rescued from it, he moves toward a final judgment we'll unpack next. What do you do when the person protecting you is also the threat you have to stop? And nowhere does that realization hit harder than at Christmas. Iron Lake goes all in on the holiday illusion. We get twinkling lights on every storefront, fake snow sprayed on windows that already look out onto the real thing, hot cocoa stands, the town tree lighting, the whole small town reset fantasy. On the surface, it looks like the perfect setting for Dexter and Harrison to reboot their relationship, to pretend this new season of their lives is clean, controlled, and safe. But underneath those lights, the old trajectory keeps grinding forward. Dexter is in an active hunt for Kurt. He's running his own shadow investigation while the town sings carols. He ducks away from community events, from shared meals, from the exact bonding moments Harrison has been promised, to stalk, to plan, to prepare. The dark passenger does not take holidays. It just learns to operate under more festive camouflage. To keep this clear, picture one specific fracture. Harrison shows up expecting a classic Christmas movie moment, father and son decorating the tree, maybe finally talking honestly about Miami, Rita, the blood he remembers without understanding. Instead, he walks into an empty cabin. The cocoa Dexter said he'd make is cold. The lights are half-strung, abandoned mid-task. And by the door? Snow tracked in over plastic sheeting, Dexter forgot to hide. Short sentence. Another short sentence. Then the longer elaboration. Harrison clocks it all at once. The industrial trash bags, the faint chemical smell, the tools that don't belong to a humble shop clerk. He may not see a body, but he sees a pattern. This isn't a dad who got distracted. This is a man who left a family ritual to go do something he absolutely did not want his son to witness. In this video, we're going to keep returning to these moments where ritual family life and ritualized killing collide. The focus is not just on what Dexter does to Kurt, but on what Harrison learns about his father's priorities when the two plans compete. Christmas is supposed to be the one time of year where you choose family over everything else. Dexter chooses the code. Here's the pattern interrupt. What if the real horror for Harrison isn't the kill room, but the living room? The half-finished tree, the empty chair at the town pageant, the way every promise of normality collapses the second a target appears. That's the existential failure. Even in a season built around peace, Dexter's psychology roots him back to blood, plastic, and control. For Harrison, this crystallizes a brutal answer to the central question we raised earlier. Can Dexter ever stop? The evidence says no. If he stays, there will always be another name on a list, another lie about where Dad went, another holiday interrupted by a threat only Dexter can handle. Each major section will show a different version of this pattern, but here, amid the Christmas lights, Harrison finally sees the lifelong consequences of remaining in his father's orbit and starts to imagine what it would mean to step out of it. So when the sirens finally cut through Iron Lake's Christmas quiet and Dexter ends up behind glass instead of behind a scope, Harrison isn't just watching an arrest. He's watching the one thing he never thought he'd see, his father's story put under someone else's control. The investigation has caught up. The myth has to answer questions. In that tiny jail cell, Dexter in an orange jumpsuit looks almost calm. Predator at rest, hands folded, voice measured, still chasing the illusion that if he just explains this right, he can steer the narrative. Angela lays out the Bay Harbor butcher file, the bodies in the ocean, the blood slide pattern he thought was invisible. Dexter does what he's always done when a plan collapses. He pivots. He starts to curate the truth. To keep this clear, we need to track what Harrison hears and what he doesn't. He doesn't sit in on the full interrogation, but he gets the headlines, the tone, the selective framing, through Angela's anger, through overheard fragments, through the way the entire station suddenly looks at him as if he's radioactive. He hears that his dad has admitted to killing Logan. He hears that Miami wasn't just palm trees and a tragic home invasion. There were rules. There was a code. There was a pattern of victims that looks a lot like the monsters Harrison thought they were running from. And even in this cornered position, Dexter is still editing. He leans on the code as justification, stressing that he only killed killers, that he was cleaning up what the system missed. He minimizes Rita by omission, folds Deb's death into fate and circumstance instead of consequence. He doesn't walk Harrison through the fact that his own Bay Harbor butcher exposure set off the chain reaction that ended with a bathtub full of blood and a baby crying, twice, across generations. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this instinct. Faced with exposure, Dexter doesn't confess. He negotiates. He offers a partial ledger. He admits enough to feel honest while still preserving the central fantasy that he is a necessary evil, a dark tool the world secretly needs. The focus is not just on what he did, but on how determined he is to frame it as righteous. For Harrison, that's the final proof. If there was ever a moment to finally put everything on the table, this is it. No more secrets, no more Jim Lindsay, no more half explanations about Trinity. Yet even now, Dexter is more loyal to the story of himself than to his son's need for reality. What does it mean when your father is facing life in prison or death and still can't stop spinning? Each major section will show a different failure of Dexter's control, but this is the existential one for Harrison. The last possible version of my dad is just misunderstood, dies in that holding cell. It's replaced with something colder. My dad will always choose the lie that lets him keep killing. And once Harrison sees that, the trajectory of their final confrontation becomes almost impossible to turn away from. Once that holding cell version of Dexter crystallizes, Harrison doesn't just update his opinion of his dad. He rewrites his entire life. Every scattered image, every unexplained absence, every nightmare smell of bleach and metal suddenly falls into a single horrifying plan. From the blood slides in that wooden box to the plastic-wrapped kill room with Kurt, from the Bay Harbor butcher reports he's read to the confession Dexter finally spits out, Harrison is running an internal investigation on his own childhood. To keep this clear, he's not only thinking, my dad kills bad people. He's asking, what does that make everything that happened to me? The focus is not just on Dexter's crimes, but on the collateral damage that shaped Harrison's psychology before he even had words for it. He goes back to the earliest frame, being found in Rita's blood, echoing Dexter's origin in Laura's shipping container. That used to register as a cosmic tragedy, a random monster crashing into their family. Now, with Trinity linked to Dexter's secret world, it reads as a consequence. Rita wasn't just unlucky. She was targeted because of who Dexter is, because of the life he insisted he could control. Harrison's foster homes, his drifting, Dexter's disappearance in the storm, these stop being misfortunes that happened around Dexter and become failures produced by Dexter's trajectory. We watch him mentally relabel scenes. The empty chair at school events is no longer my dad couldn't make it. It's my dad chose the code over me. The fake name, Jim Lindsay, in Iron Lake, stops being a quirky reset and becomes evidence of a lifelong pattern of flight. Even the way Dexter handles that deer incident, the way he snaps into procedure, now looks less like calm under pressure and more like a predator sliding back into a well-practiced role. That shift detonates his emotions. Hurt over abandonment is one thing. Existential betrayal is something else. The central question turns from, why did my dad leave me, to, was I ever actually safe with him? The man who was supposed to keep monsters away is the reason monsters. Trinity, Kurt, every enemy drawn by the Bay Harbor butcher myth, were orbiting Harrison from birth. Protector becomes vector. Guardian becomes gravitational center of danger. And then there's himself. Harrison's precision in that wrestling match, the cold, surgical way he targets a vulnerable spot, used to feel like random fallout from trauma. After the kill room with Kurt, after seeing the tools, the ritual, the satisfaction in Dexter's eyes, those same impulses feel inherited. Contamination, not coincidence. If his father is a predator, what does that make the son who enjoyed hurting a bully just a little too much? In this video, we're going to keep tracking that psychological collapse, but for Harrison, this reclassification isn't optional. He cannot even imagine pulling the trigger later if Dexter is still the damaged hero doing his best. He has to accept that Dexter is dangerous to him, not just to strangers on a table. The terrifying part is what that realization demands next. And who, exactly. Harrison decides he has to become to stop the man who made him. So once Harrison accepts that Dexter is dangerous to him, not just to strangers, we hit the bleakest question in their whole relationship. What if Dexter actually can't stop? Not won't. Can't. That's the existential stalemate the finale traps them in. To keep this clear, we need to rewind through every major I'll quit in Dexter's trajectory. He tries for Rita. convincing himself that marriage and a mortgage will domesticate the dark passenger. He tries again when Harrison is born, whispering over a crib that this tiny life will be his new code, his new control system. Later, he tries for Deb, promising that love and honesty will finally override the compulsion. Each vow sounds sincere. Each one collapses the second the investigation pressure spikes or a new killer scratches at his psychology. Season after season, we watch the same pattern: a plan to stop, a brief calm. Then the itch. Trinity appears, Lumen appears, Miguel, Travis, Oliver Saxon. Dexter always tells himself this is the last exception, the one kill that will restore balance. But every last time is just another rehearsal for the next failure. New Blood compresses that whole history into a single, brutal case study. 10 years in Iron Lake as Jim Lindsay look, on paper, like success. No kill rooms, no blood slides, no ocean dumps. But the focus is not just on the decade, it's on how fast it unravels. The moment his routine is disrupted, Matt Caldwell's cruelty, Angela's investigation instincts, Harrison walking back into his life, the dark passenger doesn't negotiate. It just wakes up. One broken deer, one impulsive murder, and the entire fantasy of control is gone. Harrison sees this in Fast Forward. He doesn't have to live through 8 seasons. He only has to listen. Every time Dexter says, "I stopped for you," Harrison can now map that line onto Rita's death, onto Deb's breakdown, onto a blood-soaked nursery he barely remembers. By the time he finds the slide box and the kill tools, he understands that this promise has been field-tested and failed multiple times before he was old enough to spell Miami. Here's the pattern interrupt. Dexter's "I can stop for you" stops sounding comforting. It starts sounding like a countdown. If he can't quit, then staying with him means permanent blast radius status, wrestling injuries that echo kill shots, convenient lies about Trinity, late-night disappearances that always end in someone else's corpse. The promise becomes a threat. "I love you so much, I'll keep you close to the storm I can't control." In this video, we're going to keep returning to this distinction, because Harrison's final judgment hinges on it. The central question is no longer whether Dexter is a man who occasionally kills. Harrison identifies a deeper, more terrifying truth: Dexter is a killer trying and failing to play at being a man. And once that role play is exposed, the next step Harrison takes can't be about reform. It has to be about removal. And once Harrison sees Dexter as something that has to be removed, not rehabilitated, the next realization hits even harder. You can't just remove the man without confronting the wreckage he's already left behind. The bodies Dexter never counts start to crowd the frame. Let's kick things off with the most obvious ghosts, Rita and Deborah. On paper, Dexter didn't kill either of them. Trinity murdered Rita. Deb was shot in the line of duty and then euthanized in that storm. Technically, the investigation files would never list Dexter Morgan as the assailant. But Harrison grows up inside the negative space of those deaths, and he slowly learns that technically is a lie people tell to dodge consequences. From childhood flashes of a blood-soaked bathroom to secondhand stories about a sweet, trusting woman who married a man she never really knew, Rita becomes Harrison's first collateral victim. As he pieces together the timeline, he realizes Rita died because Dexter couldn't let go of the hunt for Trinity, because the code and the thrill of the kill room always came first. His entire life trajectory, foster homes, abandonment, that primal memory of Red, is the downstream effect of a plan his father thought he controlled. Then there's Deb, the foul-mouthed, fiercely loyal sister who spent season after season circling the truth, falling in love with the very people Dexter targeted, and finally crossing the line for him in that church. To keep this clear, Deb doesn't just die, She disintegrates across years of lies, gaslighting, and moral corrosion. When Harrison hears how Deb protected Dexter, covered for him, and then ended up brain dead in a hospital bed while a hurricane raged, he's not just hearing a tragedy. He's hearing the collapse of the code's promise that the innocent are safe. And it doesn't stop with family. Innocent people framed or endangered by Dexter's elaborate containment strategies start to form a pattern in Harrison's mind. Dokes, branded the Bay Harbor butcher. LaGuerta, executed in a shipping container for daring to follow the evidence. Leela, Miguel, Lumen, each pulled into Dexter's orbit as allies, scapegoats, or experiments, leaving behind traumatized children, broken partners, and a Miami PD that never really recovers. How many kids like Harrison are out there, living in the blast radius of someone who thinks their violence is controlled? Iron Lake brings this into sharp focus. When Dexter's secrets start to surface, Harrison watches Angela's face as she realizes the man she loved is a serial killer. He sees Audrey's fear, the town's sense of violation, the way the investigation into Kurt Caldwell intertwines with Dexter's old Bay Harbor pattern. The focus is not just on Kurt's victims anymore. It's on the way Dexter's return reactivates an ecosystem of lies, panic, and institutional failure. This is where the code's moral framing finally breaks. If killing killers still leaves a trail of widows, orphans, framed colleagues, and shattered communities, what exactly is righteous about it? The central question for Harrison becomes brutally simple. If the plan produces this much collateral damage, can the plan ever be called good? Harrison's psychology is the knife edge here. He has his own darkness, his own urge toward violence, and we've already seen the precision of that on the wrestling mat. He understands the appeal of what Dexter offers, a narrative where the monster gets to feel like a hero, but he also feels the pain in Angela, in Audrey, in the memory of Rita and Deb. That empathy, fused with his inherited darkness, makes him uniquely positioned to see both sides of the path. Along the way, we realize Harrison isn't just judging his father's past, he's forecasting his own future. If he follows the code, he doesn't just become a killer, he becomes a walking catastrophe map. And once he sees that, the idea that Dexter can keep killing without destroying everything around him is no longer a fantasy. It's a proven lie, and it sets the stage for the only conclusion Harrison can live with. Once that lie collapses, we hit the real paradox. If Harrison now understands that Dexter's code only manufactures catastrophe, why does he still get in the truck? Dexter's escape from custody is pure, last-ditch improvisation. The careful Bay Harbor butcher is gone. What we see in Iron Lake is a cornered animal. He kills Logan, steals the police cruiser, and in minutes he's outside Harrison's window, breath steaming in the cold, selling one final plan. They can be on the road before anyone organizes an investigation. New names, new town, new life. It's framed as a reset button, the same fantasy Dexter has been chasing since Miami. Now compressed into a midnight pitch, trust me one more time, and we outrun the consequences. On paper, Harrison should slam the door. He's seen the kill room. He's held the blood slide box. He's watched his father plastic, wrap Kurt Caldwell, and recite the code like scripture. But the central question for Harrison isn't just, is my dad a killer? Anymore, it's, is there anything here worth saving? Part of him still craves the father he never really had in Miami, the protector he imagined when he was lying in Rita's blood. When Dexter says, we can start over, Harrison isn't only hearing a fugitive's plan, he's hearing a promise that the damage might still be reversible. At the same time, this agreement is not real trust, it's verification. To keep this clear, Harrison isn't boarding a getaway car, he's setting up an experiment. If Dexter truly believes his own narrative, about control and righteous killing, what does he do when escape requires innocence? He didn't have to kill Logan. He chose the lethal option, because that is his reflex. So Harrison goes with him to see, up close, whether that reflex ever changes when the stakes are absolute. The drive to the cabin is where the psychology really tightens. Dexter talks about the future, about finding a place with no history, no files, no one asking questions. He's sketching a new season of the same show, another identity like Jim Lindsay, another town that doesn't know there's a predator in their midst. Harrison is silent, replaying the past, Rita in the bathtub, Hannah on the run, Iron Lake bodies piling up around a man who swears he prevents harm. Every mile adds data. Every word Dexter says about us is weighed against a lifetime of me. In this video, we're going to keep tracking that gap between what Dexter thinks this road trip is and what Harrison knows it has to become. Because for Harrison, this is the final trial run. Each major section will show us another plan falling apart, but this one is different. If Dexter can't choose a different path now, with everything exposed and one last opportunity in his hands, then the verdict on who he really is becomes unavoidable. And when they finally reach that quiet cabin, we see which version of Dexter steps out of the truck and which version Harrison has already decided to confront. They walk into that cabin with a fragile plan. Dexter will explain, Harrison will understand, and together they'll escape Iron Lake and all the consequences closing in. Within minutes, that fantasy is gone. What replaces it is Logan's body on the floor. To keep this clear, we need to reconstruct the moment everything snaps. Dexter is handcuffed in the cell, the investigation tightening, Angela already seeing through the Jim Lindsay mask. His usual tools of control are gone. No kill room, no prepared alibi, no ocean. So he improvises. He manipulates Logan, Harrison's coach, the decent cop who has done nothing but try to protect kids and uphold the law, into coming close enough to grab. There's a struggle. A gun twists. A shot goes off. Logan's neck snaps against the bars. It's fast. It's ugly. It's not a ritual. And it is absolutely not the code. This is the line Harry drew in thick black ink: never kill an innocent. Logan isn't a killer. Logan isn't hunting Dexter for sport. Logan is just an obstacle between Dexter and the door. In this video, we're going to keep returning to these small, precise shifts, because this is where the psychology of the code collapses. In that instant, Dexter doesn't evaluate evidence. He doesn't weigh victims. He doesn't even pretend he's protecting anyone. He chooses himself. And then he walks out to Harrison. Pattern interrupt. Imagine being Harrison in that parking lot. Engine running, heart racing, believing the plan is still, my dad is framed, my dad is special, we're escaping this corrupt town. Instead, Dexter slides into the truck and casually admits he killed Logan. No ceremony. No justification that fits the script Harrison has been sold. Just a dead coach. A dead good man. Sacrificed so Dexter can keep breathing. Watch Harrison's reaction closely. The horror isn't abstract. Logan is the guy who encouraged him on the mat, who tried to steer his aggression into discipline instead of damage. When Harrison hears that this man died because Dexter needed a way out, the central question finally clicks into place. If his father will kill Logan to survive, who won't he kill? Harrison isn't just disgusted. He's suddenly replaying everything. The blood slides, the lies about Miami, the way Dexter talked about the code as if it were a hard limit, not a preference. The focus is not just on the act itself, but on what it proves. When pressed, Dexter's grand moral architecture evaporates. There is no higher purpose, no heroic trajectory, just self-preservation in its rawest form. Logan's death is the definitive operational failure that exposes the moral failure underneath. The code was never stronger than Dexter's fear of being caught. Each major section will show us another plan falling apart, but this one gives Harrison the final piece. He doesn't see a controlled vigilante anymore. He sees a selfish killer who will step over anyone, even the people his son cares about, to keep his own story going. And once Harrison sees that, the next choice he makes in that same cabin can't be walked back. So when we cut back to that cabin, Logan dead on the floor and sirens in the distance, the investigation Harrison has been running in his head finally reaches its verdict. Snow, blood, a wounded father sprawled in the white, a son standing over him with a rifle. This isn't just a standoff. It's the physical and psychological wreckage of every plan Dexter ever called control converging in one frame. Dexter is bleeding, literally dragged out into the open. Harrison is shaking, but he's not confused anymore. To keep this clear, the show strips away everything except the consequences. Logan's body inside, Kurt's trophy cave in the past, Rita's bathtub still echoing in both their memories. Harrison starts talking like a prosecutor who's been preparing this closing argument for years. The lies about Miami, the fake Jim Lindsay life, the way bodies and broken people appear wherever Dexter goes. He connects Logan's death back through Kurt, back through Trinity, back through Harry's code, as if plotting a single collapsing trajectory. He calls out the pattern. Wherever Dexter embeds himself, the town rots. A sister dies, a wife dies, a good cop dies trying to help. How many times can the same failure repeat before we admit it's not an accident? Harrison doesn't need a blood slide box anymore. His evidence is the trail of human fallout. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this moment because it's the one time Dexter's usual defenses actually have to stand up to cross-examination. First, he reaches for the dark passenger, that lifelong externalization of his own urges. Then, he reaches for the code, the rulebook he's used as moral insulation. Finally, he reaches for Harrison himself. Every kill was for you, to protect you, to keep you safe. These are the same arguments that worked on us for 8 seasons. Under his son's gaze, they finally sound thin. Harrison doesn't let him off the hook. He throws Dexter's own logic back at him. If you only kill killers, why is Logan dead? If the code keeps people safe, why do the people closest to you end up in morgues? The central question lands like a shot we don't hear yet. Is this really about justice, or is it about you needing to keep killing and calling it purpose? And then we hit the fracture point in Dexter's psychology. He stops arguing. The mask drops. He admits Harrison is right. There is only one way to stop the killing, and it's not another relocation, another identity, another season of denial. It's for Dexter to die. For a character who's narrated his own myth of control since the pilot, that is a rare, almost unbearable flash of self-awareness. Each major section will circle this as the culmination of Harrison's private investigation. He gathered memories, noticed inconsistencies, watched the code in action, and now, rifle in hand, he forces the suspect to confess. The focus is not just on a son pointing a gun at his father, but on a killer, finally cornered by the one person he can't outmaneuver, the child who has seen the whole pattern and refuses to look away. And once that confession is spoken, the next choice Harrison makes isn't about evidence anymore. It's about whether he's willing to become part of the pattern he just exposed. Harrison doesn't pull that trigger as a shocked kid reacting in the moment. He pulls it as someone who has run the entire investigation in his head and reached a verdict he can't unknow. The central question for him isn't, is my dad a killer? Anymore, it's, if I let him live, what happens to everyone else? To keep this clear, we need to track his psychology, not just the gun. He has watched Dexter break the code in real time, killing Logan out of panic, not principle, lying about Kurt, bending every rule Harry supposedly built to prevent collateral damage. Harrison has seen the pattern in Miami's blood and Iron Lake's snow. Every time Dexter claims control, we watch another plan fail and another innocent body drop. So when Harrison says, "You're supposed to protect them," he isn't venting. He's delivering the final report on a system that is completely collapsed. That's why this isn't impulsive revenge. It's the logical endpoint of everything he's learned. He remembers being found in Rita's blood. He's heard the story of Trinity. He's just watched Angela piece together the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, using the same trophies he discovered in Dexter's cabin. Every thread leads back to one conclusion. If Dexter walks away again, the trajectory repeats. New identity, new town, new lies, same consequences. And yet, the weight of what he's about to do is unbearable. He's not just killing a serial killer, he's killing the only parent he has left. The man who made him breakfast, taught him to drive, tried to reframe his own darkness as some inherited gift. In that moment, Harrison is rejecting the legacy that's been offered to him. He refuses to let his life become another season of the same cycle, another son trained to manage murder through a code. When the shot finally comes, the show strips away Dexter's fantasy of control. No plastic, no table, no perfect ritual. Just a rifle, a snowy road, and a father giving his son step-by-step instructions on how to kill him. The recoil jolts Harrison's body, the sound cracks the air, then there's that eerie quiet, the kind that follows a car crash before anyone moves. Dexter, who always assumed he'd script his own end, is stopped by the one person he never planned for. In this video, we're going to keep circling that irony, because the focus is not just on the death, but on the inheritance hidden inside it. Just as Harry once taught Dexter to channel his darkness into an impossible moral framework, Dexter has, without meaning to, taught Harrison how to make an impossible moral choice for the sake of others' safety. Harrison takes a life to prevent future victims, but he refuses to build an identity around that act. He doesn't stay. He doesn't clean up. He doesn't write a new code. He drives away, leaving the body and the myth behind. But what exactly is he taking with him, and what pieces of Dexter's failure are still lodged in his mind, waiting to surface? Harrison doesn't drive away as a clean slate. He drives away as a crime scene, on legs, blood on his hands, a bullet in his memory, and a dead father in the snow behind him. The central question is not, is he dark? We already know he is. The question is, what does he do with that darkness, now that he's seen where Dexter's trajectory ends? In the immediate aftermath, we watch three things collide at once: shock, grief, and choice. Harrison is shaking, crying, begging Dexter not to make him do this. And yet he still pulls the trigger. He doesn't run to stage the scene. He doesn't grab plastic or bleach. He doesn't even try to control the investigation. He just stands there, absorbing what he's done, until Angela arrives and does what Dexter never could. She tells the truth out loud and takes responsibility for the legal consequences. To keep this clear, Harrison's next move is everything. He could stay in Iron Lake. He could become the tragic orphan with a secret, the kid who had to kill a monster and now understands what justice really takes. That's the origin story Dexter always believed in. Instead, Harrison refuses the invitation. When Angela gives him money, a car, and an exit, he doesn't argue that he should help her finish the Kurt Caldwell investigation, or protect the town, or carry on the work. He leaves precisely to avoid becoming a local legend or a new brand of vigilante. This is where he rejects the idea of finishing what Dexter started. He's seen the code. He's watched Dexter justify stalking Kurt, building the kill room, laying out the knives. He's heard the speeches about channeling urges into a plan that supposedly prevents more harm. And he's seen the collapse. Molly dead, innocent people traumatized, his own psychology twisted into a test case. Harrison's answer is not to refine the code, it's to walk away from the entire environment that fed Dexter's delusions of control. Pattern interrupt. Imagine Harrison staying. Imagine him studying crime scenes, memorizing police blind spots, weaponizing his perfect aim on the wrestling mat into a ritual. That's the path the show refuses to take. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this refusal, because it's the one place where the cycle actually breaks. Harrison's departure with Angela's help is a deliberate inversion of Dexter's pattern. After every disaster, Brian, Dokes, Rita, Deb, Dexter stays. He doubles down, rewrites the narrative, and builds a new identity on top of the rubble. Harrison does the opposite. He doesn't spin a story about destiny or necessity. He takes the cash, the truck, and the guilt, and he leaves before the town can turn him into a symbol. That final drive carries real symbolic weight. Harrison is not cured. He still remembers Miami, Rita's blood, the thrill and horror of nearly killing that kid on the mat. He carries the potential for violence, but he also carries something Dexter never had, a vivid, first-hand demonstration of what happens when you lie to yourself long enough that your code becomes a costume. So Harrison doesn't become the replacement Bay Harbor butcher. He becomes the living verdict on Dexter's life. He saw the full case file from the inside, every secret, every failure, every body, and chose not to replicate the plan. Along the way, the series quietly shifts the center of gravity away from Dexter's fantasy of control and toward the people left behind, setting up one last question. What does justice look like when the monster is gone, but the damage remains? And this is where everything clicks into place. Because Harrison doesn't just stumble into one bad night in Iron Lake, he walks into the final act of a pattern that's been running since season 1. From the moment Dexter kept that first blood slide, the investigation into his life began, not by Miami Metro, but by reality itself. The trophies, the meticulous boxes, the ritualized control, they were always a liability dressed up as discipline. Dokes holding those slides, LaGuerta mapping those ocean dumps, the Bay Harbor butcher profile literally built from Dexter's own habits. To keep this clear, the mistake isn't that he keeps trophies in Iron Lake, it's that he never stopped believing trophies were compatible with survival. By the time Harrison finds that hidden box in the cabin, we're watching the same failure replayed with a different audience. Early on, Dexter underestimates Dokes. Later, he underestimates LaGuerta. In New Blood, he underestimates his own son's ability to connect evidence, memory, and psychology. Harrison doesn't need a full task force. He just needs a childhood soaked in blood and a father who is still hoarding proof. The focus is not just on evidence, though. It's on relationships Dexter treats like variables in a plan instead of people. Lying to Rita about his nocturnal schedule. Gaslighting Deb, insisting the code makes it all necessary. Hiding the truth from Hannah even as they flee to protect Harrison. Each season, the same pattern. Intimacy opens, truth threatens, Dexter doubles down on deception. When he shows up in Iron Lake as Jim Lindsay, that's not a fresh start. That's Rita 2.0, Deb 3.0, Hannah 4.0, another identity, another wall of lies. So when Harrison presses him about Miami, about Trinity, about why his mother died and why his father disappeared, Dexter is rerunning an old script. Deflect, minimize, reframe the code as protection. But Harrison has already seen the wrestling match, already felt that cold, precise rage in himself, already watched his dad snap a deer killer with expert efficiency. How many coincidences can you stack before a son asks, "What are you really?" On the existential level, every "I'm done" in Dexter's life leaves more bodies behind, leaving Brian in that cargo container, sailing away after Rita's death, dropping Deb into the ocean, and vanishing into the storm. Each major section will of his trajectory toward normalcy ends in collapse, forcing a new identity, a new cover, a new cycle of killing. Harrison only lives through the abridged edition. Iron Lake instead of Miami, Kurt instead of Trinity, but the architecture is identical. In this video, we're going to keep asking, was Harrison's realization ever avoidable? Or was it baked in the first time Dexter chose the code over genuine change? Because once we see the whole series as one long repetition, his final exposure stops feeling like a twist and starts reading like the only logical ending. And that raises the next problem. If Dexter can't change, what does it mean for Harrison to try? If Dexter can't change, then Harry's code becomes less a lifeline and more a slow-motion verdict waiting to be read. And Harrison is the one who finally reads it. Let's kick things off by going back to Harry, because the central question here is not just why did Dexter kill, but what story did his father hand him about that killing? Harry looks at a traumatized boy in a pool of blood and makes a plan. Not to cure him, not to confront the psychology head-on, but to channel it. Only kill those who deserve it. Never get caught. Protect the innocent. It's damage control disguised as morality. On paper, that sounds like responsibility. In practice, Harry gives Dexter 3 things: a hunting manual, a checklist for staying ahead of any investigation, and, most dangerously, a myth. You're not broken. You're necessary. The world needs your darkness. From there, every season of Dexter's life follows the same trajectory. He doesn't just kill, he narrates his killing as public service. The code isn't a fence, it's a permission slip. To keep this clear, Harry's intent is containment. But the way he trains Dexter, rituals, rules, secrecy, teaches him that control is possible, that if he follows the plan, there will be no consequences. So when Harry dies, when Vogel reframes the code as an experiment, Dexter doesn't step back and question it. He doubles down. The failure is baked in. Harry builds a system that can't correct itself, because the only judge is the man who benefits from its loopholes. Enter Harrison, who never gets the code from Harry's mouth. He gets it as a secondhand confession in a kill room, with Kurt Caldwell wrapped in plastic and Dexter explaining why this is justified. Harrison has already seen the cracks. The wrestling match where his self-defense looks eerily precise, the way Jim Lindsay moves like someone who's done real damage before. The lies about Miami and Rita and Trinity. When Dexter finally lays out the code, Harrison is hearing the same story we've been sold for 8 seasons, but without the nostalgic filter. He spots what Harry and Dexter never could. The code only works if it actually protects innocence. The minute Logan dies, that core principle is gone. No more moral high ground. No more necessary monster. Just a man who killed a good cop to save himself. So, Harrison does something Harry never did. He applies the code to Dexter. If the rule is you kill those who kill innocents, then Dexter qualifies. In that snow-covered clearing, Harrison becomes the strictest interpreter of Harry's original intent, even as he pulls the trigger on the man Harry tried to save. And this is where the collapse becomes complete, because if Harrison is the only one who truly follows the logic of the code, what does that make him? The final victim of Harry's plan, or its only honest heir? And that brings us to Dexter's other fatal pattern, the one that makes Harrison's choice even possible in the first place: his blindness to everyone else's intelligence. From the start, Dexter walks through Miami like the only person who can really see. Dokes, just an angry cop who barks and glowers. Lila, an unstable thrill seeker he can manage with a few well-placed lies. Deb, a messy, emotional detective whose instincts he can gently steer away from the truth. But look at what the investigation actually shows us across those early seasons. Dokes reads Dexter on pure psychology long before forensics ever catches up. He notices the empty affect, the convenient absences, the way bodies seem to orbit Dexter's cases, and he refuses to be soothed by charm. Leela studies Dexter more closely than he studies her, clocking his need to be seen and weaponizing it until she's burning cabins and killing Dokes to keep him. Deb's hunches about the Bay Harbor Butcher and Trinity are dead on. Dexter just keeps dismissing her until it is catastrophically late. Again and again, he assumes he's the only one playing chess while everyone else is stuck on checkers. To keep this clear, that arrogance doesn't disappear in Iron Lake. It mutates. With Harrison, Dexter oscillates between two equally condescending plans: treat him like fragile glass or mold him into a proc. What he never does is meet him as an independent thinker who might run his own analysis. When Harrison shows up, Dexter lies about Jim Lindsay's past, his skills, his reasons for abandoning Miami. Harrison instantly spots the cracks. He remembers being found in Rita's blood. He remembers Trinity. How could a simple shop clerk navigate trauma like that with such clinical calm? Dexter registers the questions, but he doesn't really hear them. Then the wrestling match happens. Harrison doesn't just lash out. He delivers a precise, nearly lethal strike, the kind of targeted violence Dexter spent a lifetime perfecting. For us, that's a blaring siren. For Dexter, it's an opportunity, a chance to guide the dark passenger. He reads it as confirmation of his theory, not evidence that Harrison is already observing, already connecting dots. Pattern interrupt. Harrison is not a blank slate. He's an investigator. He watches Dexter slip with knives, overreact to blood, vanish at crucial moments. He finds the razor, the tools, the blood slide box, physical proof that his father's life is not a one-off mistake, but a long, organized trajectory of killing. During the Kurt Caldwell operation, Harrison sees the full ritual, the plastic, the code, the calm explanation of why this man deserves to die. Dexter thinks he's finally letting Harrison in. Harrison realizes he's been outside a lie the entire time. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between how Dexter wants to be seen and how people actually see him. Because in the end, he isn't outsmarted by a task force or a rival killer. He's exposed by the one person he assumed would forever mirror back his preferred image, a grateful son, not a clear-eyed witness. Dexter has always sold us a very specific story about himself. A man apart, a lone monster with a dark passenger that no one else could ever understand, let alone share. That myth isn't just narration flair, it's the psychological scaffolding that lets him believe his violence can be quarantined from the rest of the world. From season 1, the language is the same. He's not like other people. He can't really feel. He's destined to stand in the doorway of every life, observing but never entering. The code becomes the perfect companion to that belief, a private rulebook for a private curse. Harry trains him to think his urges are uniquely unmanageable, uniquely dangerous, and therefore uniquely justified when channeled into killing. If he's a singular problem, then his solution only affects him. Harrison's arrival in Iron Lake detonates that premise. This isn't just a son with questions. This is a boy who remembers being found in a pool of his mother's blood, mirroring Dexter's own origin scene. The central question shifts from what's wrong with Dexter to what happens when that same wiring grows up in someone else's body. Suddenly, the investigation isn't theoretical. It's standing in front of him with a scarred psyche and a backpack. We see it first on the wrestling mat. Harrison's self-defense move is too clean, too precise, too controlled for a panicked teenager. He targets the artery, rides the impact, almost kills a bully with the same calculated violence Dexter uses on a table. Dexter recognizes the pattern instantly, and in that moment, his plan to be Jim Lindsay, harmless shop clerk, collapses. If his son shares this darkness, then every choice he's made isn't just about his own soul. It's a generational experiment with real consequences. To keep this clear, Dexter does two opposite things at once. He reaches for a partner in crime, and he clings to the fantasy of bearing the burden alone. He shows Harrison the blood, the slides, the tools. He walks him through the Kirk Caldwell kill room, plastic, knives, the code laid out like a twisted family curriculum. We only kill killers, he insists, trying to frame this as a righteous inheritance. Yet in the same breath, he keeps lying about Rita, about Trinity, about Miami. He wants connection without accountability, legacy without blame. And Harrison refuses to cooperate with that script. He doesn't just recoil from the gore, he interrogates the logic. If this is justice, why are there so many bodies? If the code works, why is everyone in Dexter's life dead or damaged? In this video, we're going to keep tracing how that interrogation grows teeth. Because when Harrison ultimately rejects Dexter's path, he proves that darkness is not destiny. The same trauma, the same impulses, the same potential for harm meet a different environment, a sliver of honesty, and a conscious choice. The focus is not just on a father and son arguing over morality. It's on a myth being dismantled in real time. By forcing Dexter to see his impact etched into another person with similar wiring, Harrison shatters the comforting idea that his monstrosity was ever a private burden. Along the way, we watch Dexter's last great plan, to finally be understood, twist into his most devastating exposure. And the next step is brutal. What happens when that exposure demands a verdict, not just understanding? And that's where we have to stop dodging the central question. Was Dexter ever actually in control? Or was the code just a story he clung to while everything burned around him? Harrison doesn't answer this in theory. He answers it in blood, in memory, in the way his father's plans implode the second they're exposed to another mind that thinks like his. From the pilot onward, Dexter narrates himself as a solved problem. Stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the kill room, leave no evidence. He presents Harry's code as a flawless operating system, urges mastered by rules, emotions quarantined, outcomes predicted. In this video, we're going to see how that self-concept survives right up to Iron Lake, even after Brian, Dokes, Rita, and Deb prove that every clean season ends with more bodies, more trauma, and less stability than the one before. To keep this clear, think of Dexter's life as a downward trajectory of control. Season 1 ends with him killing his own brother to protect the lie. Season 2 ends with Leela erasing Dokes and Dexter learning the wrong lesson about consequences. Season 4 ends with Rita dead in a bathtub because his double life gave Trinity access. Each apparent victory is actually a structural failure, a new crack in the fantasy that he can manage his darkness through better planning. Harrison's arc in New Blood compresses that entire pattern into a few brutal weeks. He arrives in Iron Lake to find Jim Lindsay, a man insisting he's finally stable. Urges contained by isolation instead of ritual. Harrison immediately spots the seams, the way Dexter handles a rifle, the reflexive combat precision that surfaces in the wrestling match, the too smooth story about Miami and Rita. Harrison doesn't catch Dexter with a body. he catches him with a pattern that doesn't fit a harmless shop clerk. How many lies can a controlled man tell before the word control becomes meaningless? When Harrison discovers the blood slide box and the tools, the investigation stops being metaphorical. The trophies, the plastic, the knives, they're a physical archive of every season Dexter claimed he had under control. Then, Kirk Caldwell's kill room turns into the ultimate demonstration project. Dexter walks Harrison through the code like a lesson plan. Only monsters, strict rules, righteous purpose. The focus is not just on the kill, but on the justification wrapped around it. And then the cabin confrontation tears that justification apart. Logan is dead. Angela is closing in. Harrison is shaking. Dexter finally says the quiet part out loud. The killing will never stop. He ruins everyone he touches, and the only way to protect his son is to die. This is the moment the illusion collapses. If he were truly in control, why is self-destruction the only safety protocol left? Each major section will keep circling this. Dexter was only ever in control of the narrative he told himself. Harrison's presence is the first time that narrative faces a witness who shares his psychology and refuses the myth. Reality wins. But once we accept that Dexter was never the mastermind he believed, we're left with a harder puzzle. What exactly did Harrison inherit from him? And where does that unstable inheritance go next? So, if Dexter was never really in control, what do we do with 8 original seasons of television that taught us to cheer for his plans? We don't just shrug and move on to New Blood. We treat the whole thing like the longest, slowest investigation Harrison never got to run in real time. In this video, we're going to invite a different kind of binge watch. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on the kills. On a rewatch through Harrison's lens, we track every time Dexter's plan fails, every lie he feeds to people who actually love him, and every moment where someone else bleeds for his illusion of control. Think of it as turning the show from a power fantasy into a case file that's been sitting open for years. Let's kick things off with a simple exercise. Mentally insert Harrison into scenes he never saw. When young Harrison is found in Rita's blood at the end of season 4, we usually fixate on Dexter's horror and Trinity's precision. On a rewatch, imagine teenage Harrison standing in that doorway, armed with the knowledge he gains in Iron Lake. Would he still buy the story of a random killer? Or would he recognize the pattern that follows Dexter everywhere he goes? Rita's death episode becomes the first giant red flag in a trajectory Harrison will later decode. Dexter's secret life attracts Trinity. Dexter's delay in killing him gives Trinity time to retaliate, and Dexter's fantasy of keeping family and code separate collapses in one bathtub. Once we've seen Harrison stare at Kirk Caldwell's trophies, it's almost impossible not to imagine him looking back at Rita and thinking, "You brought this into our house." Then, rewatch Deb discovering the kill room in season 6. Concrete image, Deb walking into that church, Dexter's knife midair. The plastic, the body, the lie that dies in her throat. Abstract claim. This is the template for Harrison's eventual judgment. Deb spends seasons trying to absorb Dexter's truth, to fold his code into her own morality, and it destroys her. Harrison is the second witness to that same ritual. He just refuses to bend. Specific episodes become checkpoints in a slow-motion exposure. Dexter trying to quit in season 3 with Miguel. The suburban fantasy with Rita in season 4. The move toward Hannah and the escape plan in season 8. Each major section will feel different when we watch, knowing that every failed exit strategy is another debt Harrison will one day collect. We stop asking, will Dexter get away? And start asking, What does this teach Harrison about what getting away even means? Here's the pattern interrupt. Once you do this, it gets hard to root for Dexter at all. Instead of hoping the cover story holds, we find ourselves scanning for cracks Harrison will eventually step through. We notice every inconsistency, every time Dexter hides evidence from his own son, every casual rationalization that will one day sound hollow in that final confrontation. Seen this way, New Blood stops feeling like an add-on epilogue and becomes the unavoidable consequence of everything that came before. The investigation just changes hands. And in the next section, we'll track exactly how Harrison starts picking up those scattered clues and turning Dexter's mythology into a crime scene. So now that Harrison has started turning Dexter's mythology into a crime scene, we have to ask the central question: what actually flipped the switch? There isn't one neat reveal where he walks in on a body. Instead, we watch a slow, methodical investigation where a son assembles a predator out of fragments. To keep this clear, let's kick things off by lining up the major clues. First, the wrestling match. Harrison doesn't just lash out, he delivers a surgically precise, nearly lethal strike that feels less like teenage rage and more like inherited technique. Then come the lies about Rita and Trinity, the vague half-answers about Miami that instantly clash with Harrison's own blood-soaked memories. Those emotional fractures prime him to see more. Next, the physical evidence. The blood slide box and the kill tools are not metaphors. They're trophies and instruments, neatly hidden, cataloged, controlled. When Harrison finds them, the fantasy of Jim Lindsay collapses into something colder. This is not a man who lost control once. This is a man who planned, again and again. From there, the Kurt Caldwell kill room is the live demonstration. Plastic, restraints, knives, the code explained like a twisted family lesson. And finally, the Bay Harbor Butcher reveal and Logan's death slam everything into place. The pattern, the history, and the immediate body count all converge. So how do we rank these in terms of impact? The wrestling match and the early lies feel like suspicion builders. They tell Harrison that there's something wrong with both of them, that violence and secrecy sit under the surface. Finding the blood slides is our first real confirmation point. That's the moment the investigation stops being abstract psychology and becomes a ledger of human lives. The Kurt kill room and the Bay Harbor Butcher reveal escalate that confirmation into moral horror. In the kill room, Harrison sees the code embodied, the ritual, the justification, the rehearsed language Dexter uses to turn murder into a public service. When Angela names Dexter as the butcher, that code suddenly has a decade-long body count attached. And Logan's death? That's the line where Harrison watches Dexter sacrifice an innocent man not to protect a child, not to stop a monster, but to escape. Different viewers will rank these gotcha moments differently. If we're focused on emotional betrayal, the lies about Rita and Trinity might feel like the true break, Dexter rewriting Harrison's origin story to protect his own image. If we're evidence-driven, the blood slide box is the smoking gun. If we're locked on moral lines, Logan's death is the point of no return. So at what exact moment did Harrison stop seeing Dexter as a protector and start seeing him as a predator? Was it the first glimpse of the slides, the first plastic-draped wall, or the first innocent casualty? Along the way, the show invites us to run our own ranking. In the comments, we want this to be a collaborative investigation. Lay out your timeline, argue for your breaking point. And in the next section, we'll test those theories against that final confrontation in the snow. So when we shift from that snowy crime scene in our heads to Harrison actually pulling the trigger, the cost of knowing finally comes into focus. This isn't just a twist in an investigation. It's the endpoint of a trajectory that started with a crying baby in a pool of his mother's blood. To keep this clear, Harrison's arc is brutally simple and emotionally tangled. He begins as a boy with fragmented images, read everywhere, sirens, the echo of a father who vanished instead of explaining. By Iron Lake, he's a teenager chasing that absence, walking straight into Dexter's new plan for control. Jim Lindsay, mild-mannered shop guy, no history, no blood. Along the way, the mask slips. The precision in that wrestling match, the way Harrison targets a vein, like he's been studying anatomy his whole life, tells us the trauma didn't just scar him, it shaped his psychology. From there, every reveal escalates. A lie about Miami, a half-truth about Rita. The box of blood slides that turns suspicion into proof. Then, Kurt's kill room, where Harrison watches his dad plastic wrap a human being and recite the code like scripture. In this video, we're going to keep arguing that Dexter's great failure isn't operational, it's relational. In that room, Dexter thinks he's finally letting Harrison in. What he's actually doing is making Harrison choose. And that's the paradox at the center of this story. The central question is not just how did Harrison figure it out, but why does he pull the trigger once he knows? If he didn't love Dexter, he could walk away. Let the monster keep hunting in some other town. Pretend the pattern isn't there. But because he cares about the next Harrison, the next child left in blood, love becomes the thing that forces him to stop his father. Affection doesn't cancel the consequences, it sharpens them. Knowing the full truth is liberating and devastating at the same time. Liberating because Harrison is no longer gaslit by Dexter's performance of normalcy, no longer bending himself around a father who insists the code makes him good. Devastating because that truth demands action he never wanted to take. How do you live with yourself after you've executed the person you came to Iron Lake to save? How do you grieve a man whose death you planned? The focus is not just on Harrison here, it's the show's larger theme snapping shut. Harry hid the code to protect Dexter. Dexter hides his kills to protect Deb, Rita, Harrison. Every secret is framed as a shield. Every season shows that shield becoming a weapon, shredding the very relationships it was meant to preserve. The collapse is total. So we leave Harrison driving into the dark, taillights fading, future unwritten. He carries the burden of what he's done, and for the first time, the possibility of a life not scripted by his father's failures. In the next section, we'll track whether that exit feels like justice, tragedy, or one more plan that can never really hold. So we leave Harrison driving into the dark, but we don't have to leave the investigation there. If anything, this is where our work really starts. Dexter's gone. The plan has collapsed. What we have left are patterns, memories, and that final shot of a kid trying to outrun a legacy that never actually let him choose. Now it's your turn on the table. In this video, we're going to close by handing the case file back to you. The central question isn't just how did Harrison figure it out? It's what was the first clue that made Dexter's mask crack beyond repair? In the comments, we want you to name the exact moment you think truly exposed Dexter to Harrison, and why that, not just the blood slides or the kill room, was the real breaking point. Was it the way Dexter handled the wrestling incident, turning a disturbingly precise injury into a teachable moment about control? Was it the way his stories about Miami never quite lined up with the trauma Harrison remembered? From a teenage boy standing in a pool of fake wrestling blood to that same boy staring at real blood slides glinting in a box, we can track a trajectory of realization. To keep this clear, rank your top 3 moments where Jim Lindsay's perfect cover completely collapsed, especially from Harrison's perspective. Maybe it's the razor blade in the school, the too professional way Dexter moves through a crime scene, or the night Kurt's veneer drops and Dexter suddenly knows exactly how to respond. Which scenes felt like accidents, and which felt like the inevitable consequences of a life built on a failing code. We also want to push this one step further. Rewatch New Blood, and if you can, Key Miami Seasons, with a notebook out. Treat Dexter's plans like literal case files. Log every operational failure where the logistics slip, every relational failure where a lie poisons a connection. Every existential failure where Dexter tries to quit and only creates a new identity to hide inside. Along the way, see if you can map the exact point where Harrison stops seeing a damaged protector and starts seeing a practiced predator. And then there's the secret itself. Tell us whether you think Harrison will ever tell anyone the full truth about his father, or if he'll carry that weight the way Dexter carried Harry's code, as both a guide and a cage. Does silence protect him, or does it guarantee the pattern repeats? If you want more of this kind of pattern-focused investigation, more psychological autopsies of characters who believe they're in control right up until the moment of collapse, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Each major section of this series will break down another unraveling, different killers, different seasons, same illusion of control. The next deep dive will pull apart a mind that looks nothing like Dexter's on the surface, but might share a disturbingly familiar design flaw at its core.